It's San Francisco. Like the location itself was amazing.
How in the world did you guys pull that off?
He's like, well, why don't we just film in San Francisco instead? I'm like, wait, what? Like, that's an option. The barge wasn't planned.
Really?
And I said it jokingly. I was like, can we take the barge out to sea? He's like, I'll find out. If you compare working with Ken versus working with Travis Pastrana, is like with Ken, I had to like sometimes coax him to the edge, where Travis is the opposite.
Welcome to the Sent and Bent podcast. This is my favorite episode yet, and fair warning, it is an uncensored version. I felt it important to the story, but if you want a censored version, go to Grind Hard Shorts on YouTube. You can find it there.
Welcome to the Sent and Bent podcast, number 40. And we have a super special guest today. We have Brian Scotto. I'm sure you guys have seen him when we went to the Burnyard with I missed that trip.
Yeah, you weren't there for that one.
But I was fortunate enough to meet you in Nashville a couple weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
Week and a half or something, yeah.
Yeah, it all blurs together.
It really does.
Time is moving fast, but we were able to talk about all kinds of Hoonigan stories, Gymkhana stories, helicopter piloting.
That one needs to be told on the podcast for sure.
I just don't know if I can name names in that one.
That's fine.
Yeah.
You don't have to name names.
Yeah, you can do it as vague as you need to. Really, I just want to chat more because it's super fun talking to you in Nashville, and we're both in Vegas for SEMA, so seemed like the right thing to do.
It seemed like the right thing to do.
Oh, well played. Well played.
Sorry. I couldn't resist.
That's like early dad jokes.
Yeah. I'm not even a dad yet, but
check.
I'm practicing.
You might want to do a check tonight just to see. You don't know.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, call your wife and be like, hey, so Brian thought I might be a dad, and he is a dad, so he probably
Once the dad
knows.
jokes start coming out early, so you got to just, next thing you know, they're just there.
Yeah.
Like I do them now, and I'm like, my wife just looks at me and she's like, really? It's like they're just, I've got almost 5-year-old now, and they just come naturally. So, but anyway, so here we are, SEMA. This is my 20th year in SEMA.
That's crazy.
2 decades. And this is actually the first year that I'm here sort of like by myself as an independent. Like I have my own company, but it's just really like a company of me at the moment. But I came here initially, Rides magazine when I was in the hip hop automotive side of the business, and then did 0 to 60, and then eventually Hoonigan, and did that for 19 years. And I just realized on my way out here this year, like, oh, this is 20 years. Like my first one was 2004, which makes me feel really old. How long have you been coming to SEMA for?
This is only our second time, but the first year we were here was 19. Okay. So, 5 years ago, I guess. But
and it was pretty janky. We were here with go-kart parts brand, and we brought our motorized Power Wheels toys, and like we didn't have that official of a setup, and we went from going outside to inside kind of unofficially. So we actually pushed our 450 Barbie Jeep into the event center and brought it into a like regular person elevator.
Just elevated it up to
and brought it into the second floor so we could put it inside because no one was finding it outside. And we're like posting on Instagram. People are like, where the heck are you guys? And we're like, we're next to all the Jeep Gladiators because it was the year that was it the year they came out? Like there's so many Gladiators.
It was the year of Gladiators at SEMA.
Yeah, I remember that year.
So
I remember that.
That's our only other experience.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like a first with being with like a big brand and more of part of the show, I guess. Yeah.
And with something that's not a Barbie cart.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is it weird for you guys to make that jump? And here I go. And I'm going to turn the conversation on you guys.
No, it's fine.
Is it weird for you guys to make that jump from building sort of like everything in the small miniature cart world and then like getting into more like building cars and stuff? Because I know you guys actually started with cars, right? But the Barbie thing is what became your thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it became our thing just because no one else was doing it, and it was also a lot more fun than we anticipated. Yeah. And then, but yeah, I don't know. It's not that weird to make that switch because like we've always also been into the cars. We just haven't done as many builds, on the channel and whatnot. So,
what do you like building more?
Honestly, I was kind of like I spent so much time building the Power Wheels that like I got a little tired of it, and also like I really thought I wanted to build like a car that I could use like, daily drive and stuff. But after building the monster chopper, as we call it, which is what we have at SEMA, after building that, like that I enjoyed building that more than anything else because it was just from the ground up. Like I started with an engine and 2 tires, built everything else.
And there's a lot of engineering that's gone into it. So
and
it's not just like,
it's not just engineering, but it's visible engineering. Like being a bike, like you see all the parts and pieces. It's not all hidden underneath. Like I've also been working on more recently the Humvee. We have the LS swap Humvee and all of that. And that one's fun because I'm excited to use it. But like the build process is just way less gratifying because it's all hidden under a body and it's all like, I don't know, it's just less interesting. So it turns out I do actually like prefer building the small or weird from scratch stuff more. And I also just have learned that I really hate working on other people's projects.
Yeah, no,
if somebody else started it, I'm just like, no.
I trust me, I get that. You know, it's interesting in talking about like the body covering the work. So like a few years back, I don't even remember what year it was now, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we built that Rolls Royce. You know, and Soupy and the team, they put so much work into doing all the chassis stuff, right? So like it started off, I think we started with some rails from Mark Morrison, but like the amount of work that needed to be put into that, and things sat on the jig table and you know, and the team did so much work and we weren't finished with it. And we were like, you know what, like, let's just bring the chassis to SEMA and just like have the chassis. I think we had the chassis with like the body next to it. I don't even remember.
Was that
we
like
had the
Hellcat
body
powered?
stacked. That was the Hellcat powered Rolls Royce. And like, it was cool because it was one of those things when it was finally there. I was like, I remember just the amount of people who were staring at it because, you know, you build these cars and then you finish them all up and you close them all up and all the panels are there and you don't get to see what was done underneath.
Right. And the body is like the least exciting part usually because it's just like every other whatever. Like,
especially for ours, it was just a Rolls Royce.
Exactly. It's just
we didn't do anything extra to it. It wasn't like, you know, there was no wide body kit or anything. And everything was underneath. So like it was almost cooler to show it in that state than when it was like finally finished next year, you know? So
that's cool you were able to do it. I know when we were here in 2019, there were people that had mirrors so you could like see the suspension and stuff. Yeah. And like that's cool, but like it is different than like any kind of tube chassis without a body on it. It's just like, whoa, this thing is. That's why like death carts are so cool because you can see exactly what they did. Like,
You can't hide your bad welds.
Exactly.
It's all there, all the boogers. You see them all.
There is I guess you can build things faster if you know you're for sure covering them up.
Yeah,
like that.
For us, like a death cart. You know, was for us, we called it Shark Cart. Like that was really like the first Hoonigan build on the channel that like we started with Shit Car, but like Shit Car wasn't a build. We just like tore shit out of it and tried to keep it running and like threw eBay, you know, coilovers on it and just like hacked it. Right. Like that was really that car. But you know, Shark Cart was this, someone gave us a Miata, they sold it to us for $200 and because we were a bunch of idiots, we decided to like cut the windshield off of it because I didn't fit in it and I couldn't see over the windshield and we broke the glass and we had a tank at the time. I think I showed you guys the photos of the ferret when we were on that trip and it had like a harpoon. We shot the harpoon through the window to pull the glass out and then we cut it off. And like, it was one of those things and you felt this because you were there, you know, at Tire Slayer Studios. There's like this energy. We talked about this on the trip, on the scout trip, that like there's this energy that starts to happen and you just start to do more and more dumb shit. And like it just, and like we called it scumbagging, where it was like, oh man, like one person's egging the other person on, and with you, next thing you know, there was like fire and gasoline being poured over and we're jumping over the C5 and you know, and all that kind of stuff comes together. And but with that thing, I think we destroyed it because like it wasn't fun because it wasn't like enough power and the transmission was all fucked up and like it wasn't really fun as it sat. And then it was like, all right, let's you know, we were done with it. And I think when it was over and like the camera stopped rolling, we all kind of just looked at this car we destroyed and we were all like, we are such shitheads. Like and I felt the most bad. So I started looking into like the actual EXO kits, like when I forget the name of that company, but they actually made a kit that like you would buy like the full tube frame, really, and then you would take all the Miata parts and put it on there. Exo set, I think was the name of it.
Yeah, I have heard of those. Yeah,
and it was
so it's like a kit car thing, but
it was like a track day car kind of like concept, and it just ran all on Miata stuff. So we started looking at that, and then we looked at the price of it, and we're like, yeah, we're not going to buy that for our $200 car. We'll just build it ourselves. And like at this point was when Danger Dan first started there, and like Danger Dan had built a vehicle with the guys at Nocturnal, which was a drift crew like shop in the Midwest, and they had done basically a tube frame S13 chassis that was just no body. It was just this thing. So like he had already been through this once, and like it was weird because Shark Cart, like, I mean, still to this day, I mean, you know, it's still at Hoonigan. I don't know where because I'm not involved anymore. But like that car lasted like longer than anything. Was a constant ripper. Was super fun. We eventually added a supercharger and it gave it like the right power to ratio. It was also like the easiest car to learn how to drift in.
Right.
Like we taught so many people. I think we taught like a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old in it. Something I don't know. Something that I look back at and I can't believe like standards and practices allowed us to do any of that because we didn't have standards and practices. That was the great part. But it was, you know, that vehicle for us really was like the start of like going and just building fun, ridiculous stuff. And other people had done death carts. We were definitely not the first to it, but that car really became sort of famous for us. And it was like shit car and shark cart. You know, I remember one year we came to SEMA and one of the partners we were dealing with, I think they were a glove company. I forget their names, but they were a glove company, and we were doing a partnership and doing Hoonigan gloves with them, like work gloves. And they last minute were like, "Hey, we really, you know, we really would like one of your cars in the booth." I was like, "All right." They're like, "What car?" And they offered them my 911, you know, turbo RWB, something else, and then they were like, is shit car available? And like this was this moment where I realized like what we had built. Like we had just built an entire
like a legend.
Legend of just like this is us. Like we are $500 cars, right? Like this really was serving. And they brought the car in and they had it on display. And we started encouraging people like through like IG stories of like, if you see the car, go jump on it. So like you have all these SEMA cars where like people are sitting there with their diapers and they're cleaning everything and making it all look so nice. And then there's just random people going to this booth and jumping on the hood, jumping on the roof, caving the roof in. Like we were just like, yeah, just go fucking abuse it.
I bet security was sweating. They were like,
yeah, they were at first, and we eventually the guy like got it. But like, and then it was great because people just were tagging us in photos all day of like people standing on the hood, standing like on the engine. Like we were just like, yeah, whatever. So
that's one of the coolest parts, at least for me as a fan of Hoonigan, like from the beginning, was how rowdy it started off.
Yeah.
It wasn't like something that was like, I think a lot of channels or brands kind of like progress, you know, you guys just like hit the ground running rowdy and just like locked it in. Was that like conversations? Cause I know you were there since the very beginning.
Yep.
Like, was that part of the idea, or was it kind of this mob mentality? Like you get all the guys together and it's like, let's jump it, let's shoot the harpoon through. Or was there like a plan from the beginning of like, this is what Hoonigan is going to be, this is what it means? Or was it just kind of like a figure it out as you go? That's what you wanted to be doing anyways.
Well, so realize like Hoonigan started in 2011 and we didn't upload to YouTube daily until 2017. So like there'd been, you know, 6 years of the business of us doing a bunch of other stuff. And most of what we were doing was things with like, you know, actually like professional drivers and like athletes, right? So we were working obviously with Ken, but also, you know, BJ Baldwin, you know, Ryan Turk, right? Like Chris Forsberg, right? Tony Angelo, like a bunch of people in different spaces. And so a lot of what we were doing, and actually right before we started all that, like Leah Pruitt, and like a lot of that was like, you know, we were just investing time into creating content for them. And that was like a lot of what the business model was for Hoonigan, which was like, we never saw ourselves as an apparel brand. We definitely were like, we're a lifestyle brand. We're going to do a bunch of everything. I had a big background in media. So we were sort of partnering with a bunch of athletes and being like, hey, we can be like your, you know, media arm and help you create cool content and do cool stuff together, just like we were doing for Ken, right? Like Ken was sort of the case study for that. And we could go do that for everyone else. And eventually we get to this point where like, you know, we have a bunch of equipment and we've invested in stuff and we've got this space and it's all sort of coming together. And we're like, well, we've invested, we have these cameras, like, let's just go make some fun stuff ourselves. We never knew that Daily Transmission would become what it was. It was like the thing to do when we weren't making content about the drivers. right? So it was like, hey, let's just go do this. We're all here. It's kind of fun. Like we were always doing like, even at the old shop, we'd have people stop by and do burnouts and stuff like that. But like it didn't really have any structure. Yeah. And it was like, hey, let's just kind of build a little more structure of this. People can come visit, you know, we can, and like I always refer to it as Daily Transmission sort of became like, you know, Jay Leno's garage, but like for deviants, right? Like it was like, hey, bring your car over and let's try to set it on fire, right? Like it was, you know, it's like, oh, it's like he has steam powered cars and we just have shithead powered cars, right? Like it was, that was the difference. And but for us, you know, we actually, you know, we used to upload at midnight when we first started the show, and everyone was like, "Why did you guys choose midnight?" And the reason we chose midnight was because we saw that as like the B material. We were trying to leave the daytime open for like what was the A quality material, which was supposed to be all of the stuff we were doing, the professional drivers. And, you know, I would say 2 months in, we were like, okay, we need to like look at this and realize that the Daily Transmission thing was really working. It was actually giving us not only a really cool platform to just the guys who worked in the building to be a part of the content and do stuff. And you had obviously everyone from like Hurt, who was already had a, you know, like he was already front and center. People knew who he was, and you know, especially in the drift community. But then we had people like Kakawa who like helped manage our merchandise, like and did the production side of making our t-shirts. Like he was not someone that was ever supposed to be front of house. But that show just kind of opened up for everybody, and it created this world that was very real at the time. Of like, it wasn't like scheduled. Like, hey, Kakawa, you come out now. It's like Kakawa would come out because he would hear cars doing burnouts, and then we'd stick the camera in his face, and he was annoyed that we did, and he would just say something crappy, and the audience loved him for it. And he was that like cynical Japanese dude, and that's just like who he was. Like he thought all of us were idiots. He like could barely tolerate us. Like, and then he eventually got like a Tesla or something, right? But like, you know, he just was that guy. Like he thought everything we did was dumb, but it was a job for him and he was happy to be there kind of thing. And then he all of a sudden became this character in the show. And a lot of it was not by mistake, but like it wasn't the goal. We realized it, I would say probably 20 or 30 episodes in, because we were only planning on doing 20 episodes as a run. And then we were like, oh, then we'll stop and take a break. And we never stopped. And we went to 300 some odd episodes before we stopped the show. And, you know, and that was the thing too. And so many people are like, man, you guys, I wish you just never stopped doing Daily Transmission. The reality is like after 350 episodes of like, it's hard to get excited about cars doing a burnout in a parking lot. And it became like, we weren't actors, and you could kind of start to see it that like at that point, like the level of kink that was needed to like get us excited about a car was so just like ridiculously over the top. Like it was just the deepest depravity of car pornography that required us to actually want to do this. That, you know, you weren't getting that on every visit anymore. So now someone shows up and they're doing whatever burnout. We're like, yeah, this is the 90,000th time we've seen this. And we also really all wanted to start going and doing our own stuff and building cars and doing a lot of other things. But the show was a ton of fun to do in the beginning, and it built everything that we were built around. And I think for us, it was like, you know, one day you'd have like, you know, Ring Brothers showing up with like $1 million build. And then the next day you'd have some guy built like a forklift battery powered A86 mounted to a 5-speed so he could actually like get it to drift properly and control it. Like, and he built in his backyard. And like, that was what made that show. It was just the mix of it. You never
ever knew what was going to happen or what to expect. Even though it is just like burnouts in the yard or whatever, still like as a subscriber, it's like, okay, is it going to be a, you know, twin turbo truck thing or like this crazy jank thing or this really expensive thing that's going to crash into a wall and everyone's going to laugh about it. Like, you know,
which was the alpha. That was the, I remember the most amount of hate for that, because like that car, obviously the GT V4, like it was one of those vehicles that like is rare. These guys built an off-road version of it, right? And like, it's just now the oil stain guys, like they built this thing, it was super cool, and then they jumped it, and they just got a little
too excited.
Like got a little too excited. Like the scumbaggery just poured through, and next thing you know, they oversent it and sent it into a fence, and like people were like, "Oh, you ruined a classic!" And it's like they already ruined a classic.
It was already
lifting
ruined,
it and putting it on like UTV wheels. Right. Fine, whatever. So,
You know, I don't know if we can take the blame for that one. It's like that car was already not one of the like one of however many. That one had already been off that list.
It had already been.
It was already.
If it was a Ferrari, they would have delisted the VIN number.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Yeah, speaking of the like variety of cars on there, I mean, I think two of the ones that I really remember is, and they couldn't really be more different, was Josh from Vague Industries, his twin turbo. Well, it wasn't even twin turbo at the time. It was just one turbo. Yeah. That he built like traveling across the country, an old Toyota Hilux, rusty fenders that he like shaped on a stump. Yeah. You know, that whole thing that
looks like it was built in the parking lot of a Home Depot.
Because it was.
Yeah.
And his speedometer that was just a piece of paper with.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, there's that one, and then the I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was like a pre-runner built out of an old like just big old sedan of some sort. It was a Buick or something, or
was it one of the ones that came with the Gambler crew?
No, it was like really properly built. Like it didn't have a hood on for the episode. It was black. It was like a 4-door like 80s.
Yeah, it was built. It was like a Crown Vic.
Yeah, Crown Vic or something.
Maybe it was a Caprice. Crown Vic. Was it part of like the Kibby Tech crew? Those guys.
I don't remember who it was. I just remember it was cool because it was a 4-door pre-runner thing, but it was very well built.
Yeah.
And it was just, but yeah, like
just
that was like totally crazy. Extreme, ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, look, there was some bit of, to answer your question of like, how much of it was planned. When we first started it was, let's just go out and do this, right? And see what it becomes. And we were trying to figure out like different show types. We did a bunch of different things. There was some stuff that clearly worked, some stuff that didn't. But in the end, what really started kind of to work for us was like, hey, this is just a place that people are getting to explore car culture beyond what they're seeing. And at the time, I think a big part of the initial community we had were sort of kids who either were following us because of Ken or were into drifting, and maybe a little bit of guys in the off-road world, right? Because we had done some stuff with BJ and, recoil films and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden it became, and I have this really, really broad love of cars. Like I like everything from pre-war hot rods to, obviously Volkswagen Audis, but like, just weird trucks and like I just like vehicles, right?
Yeah.
We were talking before, you like asked if I had launched my new podcast, and I'm still working on a name, but the working title right now is just very vehicular.
Nice.
Because people are like, hey, you're very particular. It's like, I'm very vehicular. It's like I'm very particular about my vehicular hobby. So it's like, that's kind of the play, and plug my own thing if it ever comes out. But yeah, it's like I just really enjoyed that exploration of being able to like show people all these different things and like introduce that different stuff. And like it was cool because we got to hear that from fans later on. They'd be like, man, like I didn't even like, especially like drifting, I think still had like a negative connotation in a lot of spaces, especially in off-road. Like, oh, it's not really motorsport or whatever. And then they get to watch guys run the man line, at the building, and they get to watch their heroes come in and like not be able to do the same thing in their trucks. And it's like, it kind of created this like this weird playground that everyone was like, oh, I get to see what everyone can do here. And
I imagine as Gymkhana got more and more popular too, that people were taking it more and more seriously, seeing what you could really do with like drifting type stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the Jimkhana thing was interesting because, like, by the time we'd a lot of the big films had already come out for us for Jimkhana by the time we started doing Daily Transmission. So we'd already done, I think Gym 7 was already out, and maybe we did Gym 8, I forget, but those were like, I think Ken transcended that. Like there was definitely this thing of like what that was different than what all the other stuff was that like was going on, and it really was, even inside the company, it was like two very different worlds, right?
I mean, but you were still heavily involved with both, like at the same time.
Yeah, so I overlapped both. Most of the team only worked on the Hoonigan side of stuff, and Ken mostly worked on his side of stuff. So I was like sort of the bridge between the two. So I worked on all Ken's big projects, and obviously I directed the Jimkhana films and ran creative for those, and all of like the livery launches and all that stuff I did. And then the team, in Long Beach at the time was like all focused sort of on that, and I was also kind of overseeing all of that. It was fun for me because like one day I would be doing something with a 7-figure budget, and the next day I had $7.
Yeah, that's really one of the main things I wanted to kind of get into today is like that era and what that was like. Cause like obviously the Gymkhanas are coming out about like once a year, but like you were so involved with both of them, and your mind must have been like so split, but also so challenged, because like doing something with no budget is a really fun challenge, and then doing something with a higher budget is really fun because you can push yourself as like a director and like storyteller in general. But like, what was, were you like sitting down thinking about this crazy epic helicopter shot and then thinking about like how we're gonna light your buddy's tires on fire? Like what was that like time frame like?
It's a good question, and like, you know, I guess something I probably haven't like talked about a lot. Like, there were moments of it that were really difficult, because when I was in Gymkhana mode, like I was just fully married to it, right? And I would be on scout for, you know, a week or two, and just like not in the offices, and maybe in a part of the world where like I was on the other, you know, other side of the clock, and not being able to respond to things, and the company was sort of running without me. And we'd have to sort of plan for that, of like, okay, I'm going to be out of pocket for however long. And even the editing process, like it would take us 4 to 5 weeks to edit the film, and I would be spending 4 of the 5 days out of the week in the edit suite just the whole time working on it.
That's surprisingly quick, honestly, for all the different cameras and angles.
No, it was a lot. I mean, you know, at the time we were doing, showing the last film, but it was like, you know, we shot like 20 some odd terabytes. It's like, it's a lot of fucking footage.
That's a lot of footage.
It takes a lot to go through it all. And you got to remember, you know, you got to be good on set of taking notes of like, which is the ones you got to go look for in that extra shot. And that was such a big part of it. It was like, you'd put it together and you'd be like, oh, this is missing. And then you remember like, oh, wait, we did this to get that other angle. Oh, what about this shot? Or we switched cameras here. You know, you had to kind of figure all those pieces out. But yeah, it was on the plus side of it. Whenever I was getting burnt out of doing stuff in the daily transmission sort of world, it was exciting to go and like have all this access to things on Gymkhana. But the stress of Gymkhana was a lot. And like, cause you only got, you know, you do it once a year,
right?
Like if it sucks, like that sucks.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I don't think there was ever one that sucked.
No, there definitely wasn't. But the stress would
there were ones I liked less than others, but like,
what was your least favorite and most favorite?
I would say Jimkhana 8 was my least favorite, which is Dubai. And part of the reason why was because, one, like we didn't have anything new. We didn't introduce a new car, right? And like probably would have been better if we did it in the Unicorn. But we were very, it was very restrictive of like how we could use the locations there. We were working with the tourism board, so it was a little controlled as to like where we could go and where we couldn't go. And it meant that most of the tricks were sort of donut oriented. So there wasn't this like cadence of like fast, big slide, donut, slow down. Like if you watch some of the films that like, you know, I would say Jimkhana 5 is the best. Right, like there's no argument.
Well.
San Francisco, like that was the killer. Jimkhana 7, also like something that, you know, I think was super strong. Even though I think the driving was better in 5. Jimkhana 9, I think, is also another really good one, which was Jimkhana 9 is the one that we shot in the industrial area in Buffalo, and it's like it's the one with the wheels slide towards the dock where it like almost goes in the water.
Yeah, that one was really good.
And the driving was just really good and it was really fun. But there's like a tempo and like a pacing that makes the films good, and it's like they need to be really fast and then they need to slow down and then they need to be fast again. And I think with Dubai there was just a lot of kind of the similar trick and repetitive. And it was just because of the confinement of the spaces that we were getting to use. So that being said, it was wild to do some of the stuff we did get to do there, like the Raptor on 2 wheels, like Ken sliding around that, like on, you know, shutting down one of the biggest roads in all of Dubai. But that was probably my least favorite. And then I don't know. Ken's least favorite for the longest time was Jimkhana 4, which was the Universal Studios film. For me, I understand why. It's because we threw like a lot of extra stuff in that film. Like it wasn't raw, and I think the rawness was always the films that did really well.
Yeah, that was the one with like the guy in the gorilla suit jumping off the ladder. Yeah. Okay.
And that one, you know, is interesting because I really enjoyed making it so much because it was like the first like real set we were ever on, right? So like Gymkhana 1 and 2, I wasn't on set. I just worked on sort of the consulting side of it all with Ken. I was living in New York at the time, and he just filmed them locally in LA. And then Gymkhana 3, we filmed in France, and it was a smaller crew. It was like a skateboarder size crew. You know, there was like maybe 10 people there, right? And then all of a sudden we go to shoot at Universal, and it's like 120 people. It's union because it's Universal. So you got like Teamsters driving you everywhere because you're not allowed to drive your own car on set. And, you know, and there's Crafty, and people are bringing me like like, you know, hey, we've got this, you know, would you like this parfait we created? And I'm like, what? Like, just like used to eating the lint in my pocket, you know, and downing it with a Monster. And, you know, I think that was this first time where like the production felt really big, and we had, you know, we had some pretty big name shooters who had done, you know, feature level work, and, you know, and we were working with Logan at the time, which was the production company. And it just was like, whoa, like this could go big. Like, I think it felt like it went from feeling like a skate video to like we were making this big thing. And then obviously the next film, Jimkhana 5. And we've shut down San Francisco. And like, that was the biggest pinch me moment ever. The whole time.
Right.
I had done, that film was the first film that I had taken like the control over. Of Ken was kind of like, okay, like you go do all the scouting. Like I'll go on one trip. Like you like run with it. Like
did
he
he
really
just
kind of
build a lot of trust with you at that point?
Yeah, I mean, we had done, you know, I obviously worked with him on 1 and 2, and then I worked heavily with him on 3 and 4. And 4, I really spent a lot of time in the edit suite with the team. And I think that made me understand what we needed to go get on set, right? Like spending that time in the edit, going through all the reviews, making the changes. And I also directed the cut down edit of Gymkhana 4, which was like we pulled all the fat out and we just did like the raw action one, and I kind of like ran the run on that. So when Gymkhana 5 came around, you know, it was really an opportunity. Plus Ben Conrad, who was our director at the time, like he really just sort of stepped away and was like, you know, the car stuff. Like I know the cameras, you know the cars, like I'll make it look beautiful. You make the action work.
Yeah.
And then over that time with him, I got to learn the cameras and all the other pieces and that. And like, you know, and he was a great mentor to me through that kind of process. So, you know, and I was able to like kind of, you know, eventually just take over and do the whole thing, which was great. But like, it was a lot of fun. And I mean, it's San Francisco, like the location itself was amazing.
How in the world did you guys pull that off? Like I remember
getting it all shut down.
I watched it. And like I had goosebumps and like chills. I'm like, how is that real? Yeah. Like that's something you do in like a Need for Speed video game,
right,
you know,
right.
And like it's the best thing ever. But like you would never imagine doing it for real. And I called my dad and I had him come over, and I was like, you have to watch this. This is the craziest thing ever. And then my dad was also blown away. He grew up in that area. And so, but yeah, as we were watching it, I was like, geez, like going down the Golden Gate, going like into the city and actually jumping and drifting. Like you guys got permission to do everything and then actually did it, and it didn't feel commercial at all. Like I guess just in general, how the heck did you do that?
So here's the backstory. So when we finished Gymkhana 3, which was the one we shot in France on the Auto Jerome, which was the one that had the banked wall.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Oh yeah, that was cool.
Ken was like, I really want to go do like a city. Right. And we had tried scouting Detroit. And in our head at the time, we thought, I mean, you know, it's 2011. Like Detroit's in a pretty bad place.
Right.
Right. And we thought we're going to be able to go to Detroit and they're going to give us the keys to the city because like, you know, there's nothing there right now. It felt abandoned, you know, and it's kind of before they
that would have been a cool vibe for a Gymkhana.
Before they rejuvenated the area. And the city just didn't want us there because they were like, we don't want you to show like the blight.
Oh, yeah.
We don't want you to paint this like a ghost town.
Right.
You know, and so in our head, we thought, wow, man, if we can't get Detroit to agree to do this, like, how are we going to get to do this anywhere else? And so we ended up going to France instead, and we did that shoot there. So, you know, Gymkhana 5 comes around, and we're like, okay, we want to try to make a run at maybe doing a city again, but we were kind of striking out, and we found a location called Mare Island. So Mare Island, you probably know if you watch Mythbusters, because they did a bunch of their experiments on Mare Island. It's an old naval, I think it's naval. Like they used to build Navy boats, so it must be naval. And they have like the dry docks and everything there. And, it was an old sort of decommissioned base. And there was like a residential area, and then there was like the shipbuilding yard and just a bunch of cool stuff and these old cool pier buildings and everything. And we were like, oh, this is a cool location. Feels like the earlier Gymkhana 1, Gymkhana 2 vibes. This would be great. We went there and scouted it. And like we walked around and it was pretty cool. But like it just didn't feel special. When we were headed back into town, and the location scout who was in the vehicle with us, Ken was like, I don't know. Because you're like, oh, what do you think? What do you think? We're like, I don't know. It's just like not, like it's cool, but like it's, and he's like, well, why don't we just film in San Francisco instead? I'm like, wait, what? Like, that's an option?
Yeah.
Like, why didn't you say that was an option? Yeah. And he's like, oh, well, I was just scouting for the movie Avengers, and I just scouted San Francisco, but we're going to use Miami instead. So like, I already know a ton of the locations we could use. And I was like what? And he's like, we could shut down the Bay Bridge. And like, that was it. Like, I didn't like at that point we were like, yes, like whatever. Like, even if all we do is drive across the Bay Bridge and then the video ends, like it'd be worth trying. So it started there. And like, we tried to do Lombardi. They said no. So we found Vermont Street, I think is what it was called. And it was like a similar style kind of, that switchbacking forth kind of road, and we were able to run up it. And then we just started kind of, I think it was 3 or 4 scouts we did. Ken came on the first one. We found some of the major stuff. And then after that, it was like, all right, just keep digging through the city and just find all these stuffs. And we, Russian Hill was where kind of like the big drift jump, and we did a bunch of different stuff in those areas. And it was just incredible. Like we had the big Vallejo jump, which is like the tabletop jump. That was like the jump where you see Alcatraz in the background.
Yeah,
earlier
that
shots.
Was awesome.
And that was one of those ones for Ken where he was like the shot that mattered so much to him was like the back shot with Alcatraz in the background, right? So the car's jumping, you see how high it is. And because we both came from skateboarding and snowboarding and BMX, like it was so much about like, how do you tell a jump where it looks real?
Right.
Like it needs to show the coping, right?
Yep.
Like you need to be able to see where you took off from, but you also need to you need to make the shot feel real. You don't want to shoot from too low where it feels like you're trying to make the jump look too big, which is like what 90% of off-road does. Like you just need to make it feel real, but then also make it feel like big and expansive. And Ken worked like super hard on just that one shot. He was like, okay, that's the shot. I don't care whatever else you do. And then we had a bunch of GoPro trickery where we were doing like array shots, which at the time was really fun.
That was with the shot you were talking about earlier, the jump drift shot. That was with the GoPro thing where
so you started to go
that was super cool.
Yeah. And that was, that shot, by the way, we had no idea what the car was going to do. We had no idea. Ken ran it the first time, and the car jumped maybe like 10 feet. It was kind of cool, but I was like, all right. I was like, well, we need to move the cameras back in again. And like, we just had a miscommunication because he didn't bother telling me he was going to like crank it up to 11. And he came the second time and just like blasted all the way out, like past camera. And it worked in the shot because you see the cameras chasing the car and then the car's sliding and like just about to hit the K-rail and just misses and goes. And I was like, you couldn't have scripted this.
Right.
And to me, the 2 greatest moments in Gymkhana history is that jump and the Evo corner.
Right.
Like those are those 2 moments where it could have been disastrous, but instead
it perfect.
Just was perfect. It couldn't have been better.
No, right.
And those are my 2 moments. I was like, you lose composure behind the screen. I'm sitting there watching it in the van or on the Video Village, and you're like, like you break the role of being a director because you're just stoked for your friend. It like reminded me of like a friend landing a skateboard trick they like were trying for months.
Right.
It had that vibe.
But higher consequences. Because if you like crash a car to a wall, like this, like, especially like I guess cost wise and stuff, like you break yourself skateboarding and you can break yourself driving, but like you can't really damage property the way that you can with like driving a car in the middle of San Francisco like that.
I mean, I'm sure at skateboarding you could figure out a way to fall down a cliff, but
for sure,
it was pretty crazy. But no, it was. I mean, it'll always be a super special time for me. It was still in those sort of salad days of what we were doing, in that like it just really felt fun and everything felt new, and it was like the amount of times, like every time the cops would come up, I was expecting them to be like we didn't agree to this. Go home. But they just come over and be like, that was cool. I'm like, what?
Nice.
Like, what bizarro world do we live in? And then when we were done with that, and then when that film just crushed, I mean, it just, the numbers, it was a perfect storm. One, I thought it was the best film we ever made. Two, Facebook and YouTube were still friends.
Oh, so it let you share it on
Facebook. Like you could share it on Facebook and it was embedded. You could watch the video on Facebook, and this was when everyone was still on Facebook.
The good old days. And
it was really the good old days, right? Like the algorithm was just serving really good content instead of stuff that makes us all want to kill our neighbors.
Yeah.
But, it's like this was this thing. It was like, it just worked and it just clicked. And then after that, we had the power. Because then I would walk into cities and be like, San Francisco let us shut down their bridge. What are you doing? Like that was like, it became this thing where like there was nothing we couldn't ask for.
Right.
Right. And it was like, oh yeah, we're going to shut down the 105, 110 interchange in Los Angeles, which is one of the busiest like highway systems in the world. We're going to shut it down and we're going to slide it, and we're going to go on top of the Hollywood sign that is controlled by Homeland Security. And we're going to do donuts up there. Like, it was like, it was just all of these things, like we felt that there was no longer a barrier for what we could ask for.
Was Ken giddy about it too? Like,
oh, for sure.
When there's like, we shut down the bridge for you, was he like, yeah?
Yeah, well, so it's actually funny because I don't, looking back at it, we didn't have enough time to really do a trick on the bridge, right? Like we had a roll because we were holding back traffic. Yeah, and we were doing 8-minute intervals for filming. We had to do 3 runs, and because that bridge is one way, so you got to go off, turn around, go back on the bottom side. We'd go to Treasure Island, go to the parking lot, turn around, wait for the closure, go back up and run it again.
Wow.
Right? So we had like staged and prepped, the way that we were going to get out. So like the vans would pull up, camera operators would jump out, run to their position. We'd call action. Ken would walk up to the car. We did it in pieces. So we did the first piece. Ken walks up to the car. Did the second part. He pulls up to the starting line. And then third part, he does the ride out. And on one of the takes, I told Ken, I was like, you just have to throw a fucking donut. Like, I know it's not like planned, but you just have to throw it because like you're on the bridge. Like why wouldn't you? So he throws this big donut on one of the takes. And in the film, it just didn't fit because we didn't have good coverage of it because we didn't have a camera guy there. Like we couldn't move cameras fast enough in the 8-minute interval. So it's actually part of the glitch that goes to the come sail away section where he's out on the barge. You'll see there's just a glitch of smoke coming up from the bridge.
Yeah.
And it's because I was like, we can't, because like I was fighting kind of like it has to make it in there somewhere. And he was like, I don't know, if you can figure out a way that it doesn't disturb the film, like go for it. And that was the thing, because I just thought it was so cool that like,
so we that's why you added the glitch is because you had that shot.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like why we put that in. Because we had that shot. I was like, how can we not put this out there?
Yeah, right. It was so perfect and like such a perfect way to tie in like the merch. I figured that was like planned from the get, but that was just
although even the barge wasn't planned.
Really?
No, so we were supposed to there's if anyone who lives or knows San Francisco, there's a right down like off Embarcadero, there's like a parking lot there next to Red Java, like coffee spot, and there's just this big massive empty parking lot, and it's for the cruise lines. And we were supposed to film there because you could see the Bay Bridge in the background. So like in our minds, like we start on the Bay Bridge and then you film this whole section and it ends with seeing the bridge in the background, right? Like it was just kind of like a nice connection to it. And we were supposed to use that for a scene and like before we went to Twin Peaks. So Twin Peaks was always the end, but that was supposed to be the middle. And we were supposed to use that for a particular scene. And we go there like on the day and Norwegian Cruise Line has like shown up early and there's like 9,000 people disembarking from the boat.
Oh, shoot.
We're like, okay, well, that's not going to work. And the location guy was like, let me see what else I can find, blah, blah, blah. I'll see what I can do. And he was like, I got a barge. And I was like, okay. He's like, we could just strap the barge. Like we could connect the barge. So there's that scene where he jumps onto the barge. He does like the like small mini Gymkhana course on the barge and then jumps back out. And I said it jokingly. I was like, can we take the barge out to sea? He's like, I'll find out. And then sure enough, they were like, yeah, you rented the barge. Like you can do whatever you want with it. It's your barge.
So did you have to have like divers just in case the car went off?
So we had a scuba team. So we had a scuba team that was off the coast, like away, that was just waiting, like, just in case Ken went off. And like he came pretty close at one point. Actually, I don't think I ever even have talked about this publicly, but we had the throttle got stuck at one point.
Jeez. On the barge.
On the barge. On the barge.
Of all places.
Yeah, and like the throttle got stuck, and you hear Ken like clutching, and then kills the engine because it was just like whipping super hard, and he was trying to figure out what happened. We had like a little throttle stick. We've never had a throttle stick in that car. The one time it happens is when we're in like the deep sea on the way to the Golden Gate, and yeah, and like it was so that was like all got like I remember like. Coming up with the creative, like, what are we going to do? How's it all going to come together? Like, putting it together. And those were in like, we were doing it at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night, like the day before we're shooting it and like putting it all together. And that was really fun. And I think it ended up becoming this like just ridiculous element to it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Ken also had a second air in the car. I don't know if you guys know what second air is. It's like the small little cans of oxygen.
Oh, yeah.
We use them all the time. They're on any kind of Gymkhana shoot that we do that requires water. We put second air in the car, so that way if you are underwater and for some reason you can't get your harnesses off, or you can't get out of the car, you can breathe until the scuba team come get you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So like Travis, actually, if you look at Travis's his station wagon, we built the carbon door panel to have a built-in second air holder.
That's awesome.
Like it's not like it's like custom built into the door panel is the second air unit.
That car is one of my favorite cars in existence. The wagon.
Here's a hot take. I think it's a better build than the Hoonigan.
I like it better.
I think the Hoonigan's a cooler car.
Yeah.
Like the Hoonigan is just
it looks
but the actual level of work.
Oh yeah,
and they're close. Like these are two really amazing vehicles.
The two coolest cars ever.
But if you ever get a chance to really like look at that car, especially with the panels off, and you just realize the amount of like not just is it really well engineered, but the finishing touches are really good.
Yeah.
Like the amount of work they put into making the dash feel like what a dash felt like in like an 80s Subaru.
Well, that was my first car was an 86 Subaru Brat. So like the front section of it's all
like
the
same.
same.
Brat guy, by the way. Like if it was like narrowed down what my first, like if you asked me that question, I'd be like Brat, AMC Eagle.
I've always liked those. Never had one.
Maybe a Samurai. I don't know. Like something in that.
He does turn his head whenever he sees an Eagle. He's like, look, that's an AMC Eagle every time we're driving.
Yeah. Well, that was like when you came to Hoonigan, we started talking. I was like, yeah, we shouldn't be friends.
Yeah.
Because we just like too much of the same bad cars.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I have 2 questions about this San Francisco shoot. So as the director, when you have your buddy drifting on a barge in open water, are you kind of a nervous wreck, or is it just like you've done enough rowdy stuff together where it's just kind of like another thing?
I think on that one, I was definitely a bit nervous because you just don't like, we hadn't tried it before, and you're just like, man, we're out here. You're like, oh, please don't get too close kind of thing. But then at the same time, you're pushing them to get close. Right? Like it's this weird in between.
Yeah, your job is to keep him safe, but your job is also to get him right on the edge to get the good shot.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because like if you compare working with Ken versus working with Travis Pastrana, is like with Ken, I had to like sometimes coax him to the edge, right? Like he would be like, is the shot good enough? And I'm like, no, I really want you to get a little bit closer. And he's like, how much closer can I get? And that's like in Jimkhana 9, the tire sitting on the metal edge of the, of the dock. Mm-hmm. Like we got close where he was hanging the rear off. And he's like, isn't that close enough? And I'm like, no, I think like the tire needs to feel like it's about to fall off. And he's like, and we got into this like, and I think, I don't know if it ended up in, I'm trying to think like, I don't know where that is because someone shot that BTS because I remember we were shooting BTS. I don't know if it ever got made into anything, but maybe one day for a documentary. But we had this big argument of like, is it worth it? Like, is that extra 3 inches worth it? Because if the car goes over, like that's it, the shoot's done.
Right.
Like that the car's soaked and we're gonna have to dig. And also, that was like a really super deep port. So it was like, it was going to fall like 70 feet into the ocean. So it was like around the ocean, whatever that is, the river up there. And it was like, all right, like, is it really worth it? And I was just arguing like, it's worth it. Like, that's the shot. Like, that's the moment. Like we need to get it. And then when we got it, he was like, ugh. All right, yeah, you're right. It was worth it, So for him, it was always about pushing him that extra little bit. And like a lot of times, and like Ken was very, he was very like pragmatic and kind of calm through these, but he would do it. Be like, do you need that take? And I'd be like, I mean, if that's the best you got, he'd be like, oh, God, just tell me you want another take. And I'm like, yeah, I want another take. He's like, do you really need? I'm like, look, if you want to be a pussy, like, and he'd be like, all right, fine, I'll do another take. Where Travis is the opposite. I'd be like, Travis, we're good, we're moving on. I'm turning the camera. I want to go one more time. I'm gonna do like 30 miles an hour. I'm like, Travis, we're done. The cameras are packed up. Like we landed the helicopter. Like he just wants to over deliver on everything, which is scary because like it's a different job. Like with Ken, it's like I need to push him to the edge of like us all feeling like it was the best shot. Where Travis, I'm like I need to prevent him from hurting himself. yeah. There's a different model. So
my other question is just the mirror of that. When Ken is on the barge, did you get the impression that he was nervous, or did you get the impression that he was just there to play and have fun, or more serious about it? I guess like what was his mindset like?
I always would say that Ken lacked the fear gene. He just, which is weird because I think like there's different elements of it. Like if again compare Travis and Ken, I mean Travis I've worked with a lot. It's like I think Travis is afraid, but he has the ability to push through the fear, right? Where I think Ken like literally wasn't afraid, but he also wouldn't do something that he thought was too dangerous.
Right. He had a limit. He'd be like, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
But he wasn't afraid of the consequences. He was just like, I don't think that's worth it.
Yeah. He had a very like, yeah, that's it. Like, we're going to do that. Like there became a certain point that we stopped jumping cars. And Ken's whole take was like, anyone can get in a car, drive 55 miles an hour, hit an engineered jump and land at the other end. Like it's not really skills. It's
just design. It's planning.
It's planning and it's the balls to go do it. Right. He's like, but the risk of it going wrong and breaking your back, like, is that really worth it? Right. Yeah. Is that worth kind of like what we're doing? You know, we're falling off of, you know, Pikes Peak on Evo Corner was totally worth it for Ken because like that was a very skill-based moment for him. And like that was what motivated him kind of through that. So
to get better as a driver.
Yeah. And I think just to prove, you know, he wanted to prove that, you know, he could do it a lot of times, like, you know, to himself. And he was, you know, Ken was very much of like, what does it look like in camera? And that's very different than a lot of other drivers I work with. Like in their head, they're just trying to do the thing. And they're not sitting there being like, does this look good from the perspective that you've got? Do you need me to change the way I'm moving the car so that it looks better in camera versus the best way I think I need to go around the corner? You know, so it was very different. But Ken was always really calm. And I think, you know, to answer the question that started this all was like, was I ever nervous? The only time that I really felt nervous was Ken was on Evo Corner. And that's because it went wrong. Meaning like he wasn't supposed to go that far out. Right. Like we had discussed this and like he wasn't going to try to go that far. And he ended up going out that far and he was able to pull it back. But there was definitely a moment where like he got to the edge and I was like, oh, this is not going to be good. Right. And then obviously it ended up becoming great. Where the first time I was ever on a shoot where I almost stopped it was with Travis because we were doing the 160 mile an hour jump. That's at like the end of that, the first Gymkhana we did with Travis in Annapolis.
Not
even the bridge, just it was just
just the road
like in Maryland.
Oh yeah,
that had just a little
first
kicker.
Big jump.
Yeah, just the roller kicker. He was just carrying so much speed that you just get to a fatal velocity. Yeah, where you're just like it doesn't matter. The roll cage, it doesn't matter the Hans device.
Yeah,
like,
it's just
like if you hit something like an oak tree, and there was a big oak tree there.
Yeah,
like doesn't matter all the safety gear you have. Your brain is going to hit the front of your skull, and it's over.
Exactly. Yeah,
and like I was sitting there, and it took us so long to get up and running. That I broke from being a director and trying to get the best shot, and all of a sudden being a guy who's known Travis for 20 years and who knows his kids and his wife, and I was like, hey, Travis. And he's like, what? I'm like, I want you to do a practice run. And he was like, no, I got it. I was like, I want you to hit it at half speed. And he's like, oh, no. I'm like, Travis, they're asking you to hit it at half speed. Who the they was, it's just a made up boogeyman. Yeah. But I just had this moment of like, if this all goes wrong, like this could be really bad. And like, I'm like that. And I was such a switch for me because with Ken was the voice of reason.
Right.
And I'm like, no, go bigger, do crazier. And I had this moment to be like, okay, I have to be the adult in the room today. So he hit it at half speed. And once he hit it at half speed, I was like, all right, yeah, we're good. Let's go. And then we sent it. But it was like having to see it kind of go. And I was feeling uncomfortable, but I was watching the Subaru team and they looked very uncomfortable. Right. And I was just kind of reading the whole situation. And I was like, we all know how dangerous this is. And, it was like 100 and whatever, 50, 60. I forget how fast he was going, but it's just insane. It was an incredible amount of speed. And, Travis has this mentality of like, you can fix any problem by pouring more speed on it. Right. Like that's just how that is. And, BJ Baldwin was like that too, was like, oh, I'll just go faster and we'll kind of make that work. But BJ sort of lives in between Travis and Ken. Like he was more like fun to work with. Cause like with Ken, when we were on set and we were doing this, it was business. Mm-hmm. We're here to get the shot. We spent a lot of money to get here. We've got 4 or 5 takes. Let's use them as best as possible. And it was serious. It was working. Like, not saying that we didn't have fun, but like, and then Travis, like the whole time, you're like, he would be doing this if the cameras were off.
Yeah, for sure.
Like Travis is here for Travis. Yeah. Right. And he's here for you to be like, good job, Travis. Like that's like, which makes no sense to me. But trust me, you don't need to you need no validation from me, my man. You are the GOAT at this. Yeah. So but BJ was sort of in the in-between of like kept it fun, but was really willing to sort of like take direction and like do what was needed and like not do the things that shouldn't be done, kind of thing where like Travis can be his own person. And sometimes that's great. And other times you're like, oh boy, wait, Travis, why'd you slide it that direction? We did it the other direction. I want to try it that way. And I'm like, yeah, but the cameras are on the other side, but okay, we'll do it again. All right, let's go. Take 97. That's it was super fun during my time, directing those films to get to work with all of those guys and everybody I worked with, RJ Anderson, when we did that video for Polaris, so it was a lot of fun. Like I really enjoy that relationship of like, I sat in these multiple roles and I didn't realize it when I was doing it, but like I would act sort of as a stunt coordinator. We had a stunt supervisor on set, Eliza Coleman, who's the only reason that everyone goes home safe at the end of the day. I love her. But I was the one who was ideating all the tricks and what we were doing and the stunts and putting that all together. And then I was like in the ear of the driver, talking to the driver, like actually directing them, and then also overseeing the cameras and all the other pieces. And it was fun. Like it was a lot. And like,
yeah, sounds like a lot.
But it's some of like the best days in my career life. It was like those days on set, and like getting those moments. But it's also uber stressful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I don't think I'd want to be in that role.
Yeah. But I miss it, now that it's been, a few years removed since I've shot a film, it's like, I really want to go do another one. And I think at a certain point I was like, I'm kind of done with these. Like I've done a bunch of them, and I've had a bunch of success. Like, why do you want to keep doing them? And then like, a couple of years go by of not doing them. You're like, I really want that.
Well, it's the coolest thing ever. That's why you want to keep doing them.
I appreciate that.
Is there a chance that it happens again? Like did Hoonigan own the Gymkhana like IP or like?
Yeah. So when Hoonigan, when we sold Hoonigan, which is over 3 years ago now, the IP of Jimkhana went with it. Okay. And part of the understanding was like, we really wanted kind of a lot to unpack here, but
yeah, we could just start with what happened to Hoonigan if you want to go into it, or if you don't, you can just gloss by it.
But like to go back on it, like when we got to the point of selling Hoonigan, I think the thing that was really exciting for Ken and I was like we always wanted to do more with the Jimkhana brand. So realize that like Jimkhana was this weird thing for Ken because when the first one was uploaded, we had no concept that like it was going to do what it did. Right. Like it wasn't like, hey, we just made a viral video. It was like, we made this cool video because, I've told the story 1,000 times, so I don't want to bore the listeners who've heard it before, but very quickly, Ken built a car to compete in a series in America called Jimkhana USA. The series did one event and then went out of business. So there was never like a second event. And he was like, well, I have this car that I built just to go do this because he was racing rally. But in order to race rally, he'd have to like get in a plane, fly to Vermont and go test there. And he's like, I want to, like, I'm here in California. I want to be able to just go slide cars around. Right. Like, and that was, he saw that opportunity with Gymkhana. So he just went back to El Toro, which was the location that they had filmed. I mean, that they had held the actual competition at. Right. And, the Jimkhana competition, if you're not familiar, is just a timed obstacle course. Right. That's it. So it's like, you got to move through it. You got to do donuts. You got 540s, blah, 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 blah. And it's much smaller and it kind of feels like an autocross with sliding. And Ken was like, this would be cool if it was like up a gear, maybe up 2 gears. And that was sort of the mentality of like what happened. And I was working at 0 to 60 magazine at the time. And Ken was like, I got this idea. We want to do this thing. And like, to be honest, like, it's just a different era. And it's probably crazy for someone who wasn't alive during that era or wasn't of age during that era. Like, Jymkhana was done as a magazine story.
Really?
And the video was the supplement.
I didn't know this.
If you go back and watch Jymkhana practice, it says as seen in 0 to 60 magazine.
That's
the article
crazy.
had already come out.
Really?
And it was all about Jymkhana as like a sport and this thing. And the video was basically Ken going, because we didn't think we got good enough photos and good enough stuff from, what we did with the actual event, Jymkhana USA. So it was like, okay, let's go do this thing, at El Toro. And it just kept adding. So one thing about the El Toro thing was, and that was shot with the guys from Mad Media, was like, it was done over like a month and a half. Because every time Ken would go do something, he'd have another idea. And he called me and was like, what about doing donuts around a bar stool? Like those motorized bar stools. Like that would be really funny, right? And we started talking and I was like, no, do it around a Segway, because like everyone will be cheering that you hit the guy on the Segway. Because at the time, like I lived in New York City and like people are like on Segways in like Washington Square Park and you're like, fuck that guy, So it was like the idea was like the Segway was kind of this hated character. So it was like, oh yeah, that'd be good, because Ken at the time was like, I've never seen anyone do a moving donut. Like a precise, like, we've seen NASCAR donuts where you just blow across the grass, but like a controlled moving point, right? Like move the cone. And like each of these ideas developed as we were making the film. And I say, I was in New York and Ken was just sending me clips at night being like, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And then, and that obviously created Jymkhana Practice, which then did what it did and opened up a world for everything else for us to make. And that part was really rad. I kind of forgot where I was going with this, but where were we?
we were talking about like the future of Jymkhana, that stuff.
So obviously, because this all started from an event, like an actual race series.
So you guys didn't actually own the name?
We were like, so this is actually part of the story, is like, we didn't own the name at the time because it was just the sport of Jymkhana, right? Which, by the way, was like kind of, it's, comes from horse racing, right? It's like kind of like steeplechase, but when I tell horse people that, they're like, no, it's not. I'm like, whatever. People like, I always say that, I'm like, yeah, it's kind of like steeplechase, and they're like, absolutely not. And I'm like, I don't know. You'd probably say like short course is kind of like Baja, whatever. But we would argue it's not. But whatever. So anyway. There was this, this time where we're like, okay, we really want to build this series, and we came up with the name Jymkhana Grid, and it was like, we're gonna do, Jymkhana, and we're gonna kind of like take it and basically take the course map that was already existing in sort of the Jymkhana USA world, and also Jymkhana was popular in Japan, and just pull the course map wider, right? Like make it bigger, make it faster, and like force a little bit more sliding, and really focus on doing it in big, high-powered all-wheel drive cars. And we did the first Jymkhana Grid event actually we did a practice event at the Forum, and then we did a big event at Irwindale, and it was rad, but like it was a lot of work, and we realized it was a lot of work, and it was just there was so much going on for us at the time, right? Like this was the same time Jymkhana 3 came out, so Jymkhana 3 was big and had done big numbers. Ken had made the shift to Ford. We're racing in the WRC. And we just had to sit there and look at everything that was in front of us and say, okay, is this what we really want to put our effort into? Right? Mm-hmm. Like there's so much opportunity with Ken's racing. And by the way, we hadn't launched Hoonigan yet. We knew Hoonigan was coming. Mm-hmm. We teased it on the side of the car, but we're also launching Hoonigan. And it was all these things were happening. And we got this opportunity with Monster Energy where they were like, hey, we love this Jymkhana Grid thing. We'd love to run it in Europe. So we basically gave them the license and sort of this half-written rules book that John Deary, who then came to work at Hoonigan years later, had helped us write, and we handed that over to them, and we said, okay, this is Jymkhana Grid, And I left out a point here. And one of the point was we did do one event at the X Games. And that was actually when we thought it was going to explode. We did X Games LA, and the viewership for it was as big as Rally Car on its first weekend. And we're like, wow, this is crushing. And Rally Car, if you guys don't know, it was this really weird world for the X Games because Rally Car was like doing better viewership than like Vert was.
Really?
Yeah. Like it was doing really well for X Games. So, which was sort of happy for ESPN, but like the action sports community was like, what the fuck are these cars doing?
Yeah.
And I get it. I get it. And, and long story short, we did this one thing with X Games, and what ended up happening was X Games, they decided to move to Austin, Texas, and they went to COTA, and there was not a big enough footprint for us to do it the way we wanted to. And we realized that the compromised version just wasn't going to be as good. We're like, let's stop doing it. We let Monster kind of run it in Europe, and Ken would go out to some of the events, but it kind of lost the energy. And, so now you fast forward to 2 or 3 years ago, and Ken and I are looking at this, and, Ken's in his 50s, and he's like kind of really wanting to retire from traveling as much. And I was finally going to be able to get him to go to a bunch of Gymkhana events, because that was part of the issue was like, hey, if we do a 6-part series in the US, like you got to go to all 6 events. And he's like, yeah, but I'm like traveling all the other weekends. Like that's when I'm with my family. So I think there was this opportunity of like, hey, at the time we thought he was going to win the championship. In Rally America, he lost by like a point or something. I forget now, but it was so close. And he just really wanted that championship. And I think it was like, seal that championship. He was always a bridesmaid, never a bride, like was always a few points short on the championship in ARA. And like, we thought he was going to get it that year. And unfortunately it didn't work out. And the idea was like, okay, then next year we'll really start kind of building up Gymkhana Grid. So I say all of that because that was sort of where our thought was like, hey, we're going to, Ken was kind of want to take a back seat. We'd already moved Travis into the Gymkhana role. Mm-hmm. And we kind of looked at Grid as like, Grid could actually be a feeder series for who could be the next people in the video, right? Like that was sort of the mentality around it all. And we tried as a team, like as the guys internally who worked at Hoonigan, we really tried to kind of get Grid off the road, like off the floor. Like after Ken passed, we kind of thought like, man, one of the many legacy things to be able to have this like a motorsport that could continue forward that like was this thing he started would be great. But there was just a bunch of things that were up against us. And, and Hoonigan, and I don't want to talk too much on the Hoonigan thing, but what I will say is like Hoonigan operated really, really well because it was a small, nimble company that was like myself and Ken making most of the decisions, right? And the minute you become part of a massive corporate company, those decisions don't happen as fast,
right?
Which means you're not as nimble. And it's like, and the things that allowed us to do what we did sort of started to kind of go away. And we had also gotten so used to doing them that way that all of a sudden now there was like, like legal and lawyers and all these other things, which like, I understand. Like, it's not something that I sit there going like, oh, it's like, no, I get it. I think we thought it was going to be one way. It kind of worked out to be a different way. I think, what the upsides and the things that came out of that relationship that were really valuable were like, they were able to bankroll projects like the Hoonapig. Like the Hoonapig would never have happened in the previous world because like to build it in time to go race that year, because we were racing with the 100th anniversary, like, like we wouldn't have been able to get enough partners signed on in the amount of time it took to then go build the car and to go do that. But when you're working in a company like that, they're like, yeah, well, we'll just write you a blank check, like go build it. And like that part of it was really rad. But unfortunately, economy shifts and everything kind of shifts with it. And then all of a sudden you're attached to that. So even if you're doing something that's successful, there's other things that aren't. And, and it all became that. And it just, I think we really were looking to be like, okay, how does that kind of continue on? And, when I left Hoonigan, which is over a year ago now, one of the things I told everybody was like, I'll be back to keep the Gymkhana films going. I don't really know where that stands today because things kind of fizzled out this year. And like, I would love to see that series keep going. Yeah. With other people behind the wheel.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like the Travis one was great. You could do some with Travis.
Honestly,
and
that one was
some other
one of my favorites too, just because it was so different.
I mean, the last Travis film we did was one of the craziest films like I've ever made. Like it really got to the point where I'm just like, oh, like, is this like, are we kitchen sinking this? Like, or are we just raising the bar so high that it's like almost impossible to go chase, you know? So
that is a problem in the what we all do with entertainment in general and YouTube and stuff.
Where's the line?
I have that with things I build. Like it's just happened again. Is like I build something and I'm like, I raise the bar to like, what am I going to do that's above this? And like, I always come up with something, but it's like,
and it's difficult because, you know, I'm now like a year removed, right? Like I left Hoonigan a year ago. I went and worked outside the industry for a year, which was like a nice little sort of like reset and refresh. And, you know, and now I'm back kind of doing my own thing again. And I sort of kind of like looked at those 13 or so years, or 12 years, whatever, at Hoonigan, and was like, you know, what were the good parts and what were the bad parts and what were the parts I would like do again, right? So like as I jump forward with, you know, 3, 2, 1 action, which as you might know is my call sign from Hoonigan. From Jimkhana, that was always what I would say to start the car. You know, as I look at that company, I'm like, okay, what are the things I want to do and what are the things I don't want to do? And I think one of the really big things that we got sucked into was like doing things for the sake of them being bigger than the thing you did before and chasing views and like building cars that like at the end of the day, none of us really were that interested in. But
don't even make sense. But we
just felt like we were competing with all these other people doing these crazy things. But none of them were something that like we really took a lot of like, you know, love out of at the end. It was just like, I mean, I think we were all excited, you know, and I think like, you know, Soupy and his team, like those guys built some really amazing stuff and they really lifted sort of the caliper of like what we were doing and what we were building. And as someone who really loves builds, I really, really respect that. But it also sort of got away from like what the core group of us wanted to go do with cars.
Right. Was like, cheap cars and just
I mean like a one car that's a perfect example of this is like we built that Honda Ridgeline with the Indy car in the back. Like it is wild. It is a wild car, but we built a car that we couldn't even drive. Right. Like we built a car that like their test drivers had to drive. Like I think I told you guys, like they kept the laptop. We couldn't even start the damn thing. And like I get it, like the amount of money that they have invested and also the technology that they have invested. They're trusting us with this vehicle. And it's like, it was really this thing that was this like, you know, and look, it went and did laps during Indy testing at Thermal. So it's like, it's not like the thing didn't do stuff. Like it went and did cool things, and we wanted it to do more. But I just, you know, you get into that trap of like, is this really what we want to be building? Or are we building something because the only things that get to the top of the algorithm are like the most shocking thumbnails, right? Like they're going to put an Indy car and a like semi pickup truck together.
Did it do significantly better than your other similar content?
I don't know, man. It's such a weird world as we've been, you know, as we were in it for so long. That, like we did an eBay coilover install that did 1 million views, and then we like built a Ridgeline with an Indy rear end that did 1 million views. And it's like, it's like the time and place.
I mean, we've had the same scale of things. Like,
where it works. And like, look, I think it was fantastic to work with the Honda team. Like we got to work with Honda Racing, like America, right?
That's
like,
awesome. That's like, crazy.
The team over there was just great. Like working with they were like so much. I mean, they were true fans of what we were doing, which was super cool to watch these engineers who like work in Indy and they were like coming to our shop and like geeking out over what we were doing. They were letting us come up to like their place, you know, and they're up in, I think it was like Santa Clarita area. And like, you know, they would let us go up there and like show us all this stuff. And it's like, it was really cool. And like that part of the project, I think was the great part. I think the bigger problem was like when it was done, you know, what do we do with it as us? Like having a Honda driver go drive it somewhere, sort of remove the Hoonigan story. Where Scumbug is probably one of my favorite projects we ever did because like we built this Baja Bug, and like at first we just bought a Baja Bug off of Craigslist and took it like with like 3 repairs to Mexico. I mean, it broke. Literally, the steering wheel fell off at one point. Like everything broke on it that could break. And then the next year we went back and like beefed it up, and Blake Wilkie and Brad like, you know, put together, you know, like a more class 5 kind of setup for it. And and it was a lot of fun. We went back down and we pre-ran the Baja the following year. The plan was to return and race. Pandemic happened. We didn't go back to race, but like that was this thing. Like we actually all got to go use it. And like, I talk to the guys now because like you got this group of us who all left, and there's some cars that we built that like the group just doesn't care about. Mm-hmm. Like whatever, sell it off, do whatever, like it's fun, but it's gone. And a lot of that stuff we got rid of. But there's cars like the Scumbug that people are like, oh man, like that one for me means something because it really felt like something like we cared about. And I think that we started to realize that at some point. And like the Donk actually is a car that we all really cared about, which may seem weird, but like
you guys changed it forever. Like I don't know how popular they were in California or anything, but when you guys did the Donk, like people in Idaho were talking about Donks all of a sudden. And I was like, I never heard of one before you guys did it. And now everyone I know is talking about them. Like, do you think you changed that whole industry?
Well, if I did, it would be for the second time around because when I was at Rides Magazine, we used to have this section called From the Streets, which was like regular people's cars because Rides was all celebrity based, right? So it's like 50 Cent's his car and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And we had this section called From the Streets. So when I started working there, I really wanted to lean into From the Streets because I was like an enthusiast. Most of the guys who worked at the magazine at the time were more in like hip hop mag. So like they wanted to work with all of the celebrities and talk about their cars. Obviously Dub Magazine was doing the same at the time. And I really wanted to lean into like cars like people were building in the streets. And this guy from Miami was like, hey, we have these things down here. They're called Donks. And it's like, all these like old Chevys lifted up on 24s. And he sent me photos and they're like bright colors. And it just looks amazing. And we're like, all right, we're going to go cover it. And we ended up putting it on the cover of Rides for the first time that there was a non-celebrity. Like it was just a car. And it crushed. Like it did like 3x the sales, but only in one region. I think it was basically like south of Virginia and as far over as Tennessee. Crushed. And it was like, okay, that's clearly where the demographic is. And like these are the Donkers. And it was like, okay, that was this thing. And we launched a magazine called Donk Box and Bubble. And then what we started to notice was like all of a sudden the Midwest started picking up on it a little bit more. It never really became a West Coast thing. I think lowriders really kind of owned that space in there in the culture. But I did that in 2006, 2007. And then when like the pandemic hit, like, you're just like home bored, like looking up stuff. And I don't remember exactly. Like there's a guy Sage who's his nickname is Donk Master, and like he started. So this shift happened. Like when we kind of took Donk culture and made a magazine about it and kind of spread it to the world the first time around, it was all about like style. Right. It was about Louis Vuitton interiors and Lambo doors and like, crazy 30-inch wheels. Like my one buddy did plexiglass wheels so you could see through them and they were 30s.
Cool.
Carl Krantz. And like did all these crazy things. And we bring them to SEMA, and they were like they got the same amount of love and hate as like the lifted like squat trucks did. Right. Like it's like the same kind of vibe.
Yeah, it's very similar.
It was like they were just built for the sake of being crazy. And then all of a sudden this scene, and all of them pretty much had like crate 305s in them. Like 350s. Like that was just what it was, right? Like everyone had a great 350. Maybe you had a big block 454. No one was building big power ones. And what it was happening in the background was guys like Donkmaster were like building race ones that had, 1,500, 2,000 horsepower in them, and they were drag racing them. And that for me was like, ooh, this is interesting. Like, let's go build a big power Donk. And it was also the middle of the pandemic and I'm on Craigslist or Marketplace and oh my God, look, it's a 71, like just the perfect Donk I ever wanted. And, and we did that. And, and that car is super important to me because it kind of blends these two worlds. Like my previous world was this world where I worked in hip hop. And like the second world for me was this world where I, when like blended into car culture. And then I left, to go work really strictly in motorsports. So it was like kind of blending that. But the other part of it that like I think was, in hindsight looking back at was like we were all making content remotely and doing the live stream. And in California, like there was just so many rules around how we could all go work together that like we weren't shooting together. We weren't spending a lot of time with each other. So like we were all just kind of like on our own. We did the show called Home Wrenchers. We were working out of our own houses, and we were on the live stream every day. And that was like the first time we all started to get back together to like work on stuff. And like, I think we all really were like we were just like stoked to be out of the house and back in the shop together. And, you know, and we were sort of working during a process where like, you know, we were getting tested one day and then like, okay, everyone's good. We all can come in and work the next day. And we were kind of like following all like the production mandates that were required. And it was fun. And like, I think at first everyone was like, what cockamamie idea does Scotto have now? Like, you know, like this just wasn't a group of guys who were like, yeah, we're going to put 28-inch wheels on a Impala or Caprice, and this is going to be cool. Right. And it was fun. Like, you know, me and Hurt both like got to learn how to weld on it. Like, you know, I could stick something together, but we boxed the frame together and like we were picking up like levels of work we hadn't done before. And Soupy kind of took a little bit of a step back and was like, teaching everyone. That's where in the past, like the business was always like everyone at the company had a different job. Like we weren't on camera talent. Like Vinny was helping do ad sales. Like Ron was running, you know, social media, and like everyone had this job. And like now all of a sudden we were there every day working on the car, and that was our only job. So it was like fun because Soupy was like sitting there being like, no, this is how you do this. This is how you do this. And like, it was great because like all of us got to kind of work in the shop together. We all really kind of enjoyed that instead of us all working individually on our projects in the off hours. Because like if you got to see any of us build our personal projects, for me, it was usually 2:00 in the morning, or for Vinny, it'd be like right after work, for Hurt, maybe on the weekends. Like everyone was kind of there at different times. It wasn't during the normal day because we were all doing our day job. So that was this thing that like really brought the crew back together. And then we moved into Tire Slayer Studios right afterwards, and that car was running, and we got to drive it over there. Like that was nice. like you know, it was like, let's get it. And then like I got to do the first burnout in it. It caught fire. It was awesome. And you know, and like that I think was this car that like really kind of got us back to this like, yeah, this is the kind of stuff like, you know, we want to build. And look, we then obviously went and we did the Ridgeline, and it was a fun project. I just, you know, kind of tangent away from this, but it's like, I don't know if I have regrets around those projects. They were fun, and at the time, everyone else was doing them. But it's kind of like this. Have you ever been to like a stadium and everyone's standing? So everyone has to stand because it's stadium seating. Yeah. And you kind of just want to be like, if we all sit, we can all still see.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like sometimes I just want to say that to the car community of like, if we all just build the shit we really want to build, it'll be okay.
Right.
But instead, if we all just keep trying to one up each other, we're eventually going to be like Fast and Furious and sending cars to the moon. And like we've all jumped the fucking shark, you know? So.
Yeah, that's something that like with this, you know, the Humvee build that I was talking about earlier that we've been doing, like that's both the build itself and the direction I'm going with it right now is like a bit of that of like, you know, the reason I'm building a Humvee is like, I personally like it. I think it's cool, but also it's something that is like ridiculous enough, you know, to get attention regardless of what we do with it. Because it's a Humvee. Not a lot of people are like actually building them into anything. It's just like a, you know, ridiculous flex car or whatever, you know. But anyway, the point is like just doing that at all was kind of a more personal, like, hey, this is just what I want to build. But then also like, as we're building it, like I had these ideas of like, oh, I'm going to do like insane long travel. I'm going to do like cantilever suspension just because it's ridiculous and stuff. But like now that I've gotten a little farther into it, I'm just kind of like, why? Like it works really good. I'm just going to build it like to be pretty good and something that we can actually use instead of like going over the top just because we think it might get more views or whatever. I'm just like, it's not like worth it.
And maybe on this one, it's worth to build it the way we actually want it. So we'll actually use it all the time, even if we're not filming or whatever. And then, it's a really good analogy. If we all sit down and just enjoy our own stuff, like we don't have to go so crazy that it's unusable anymore. Because we've done that before too, even in our small things. Yeah. It's like, at some point, it's like, okay, if I'm going to go up to Ethan's and rally something around, like I'll probably just ride the dirt bike. Yeah. Because everything else is maybe a little too extreme. Like there's certainly things that are super fun and a complete novel experience, but it's like, you know, if you're not having fun in it and doing what you want to do, then what are you really doing? Like,
Yeah, and I think this is, I think this space is getting back to this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of like, you know, I have a car. I have an Audi Coupe Quattro. I've had the car for over 20 years now, and
is that the one that was being built at Hoonigan when I was there for the
probably because we
it's
brought
kind
it
of
to
bluish?
SEMA. Yeah. And it's like, you know, it's crazy, and it's the perfect example of scope creep, right? Like it was supposed to be a 500 horsepower like driver.
Yeah.
And then it became 1,000 horsepower race car. And it's still not running properly.
Right.
Right. Like all that, like it's because I just overcomplicated everything.
Mm-hmm.
And like you start to do these builds and you don't really kind of think of like what it takes to keep that running when it's done. So you're like, yeah, race car parts. Yeah, like definitely. I need a paddle shift.
Right.
You're like, yeah, but tuning a paddle shift is a ton of work.
Right.
To get it to actually work right. And like, yeah, but the paddle shifts in Ken's car required constant upkeep and a team of 6 people keeping it running. And there's me, and I'm running a company, and I only get about like an hour or 2 a week to work on the car. That's like not dealing with everything else. And so I took this car that I loved, and I probably overbuilt it.
Right.
And now it's this close. Like it really is. Like it starts and fires, but there's a transmission issue for engaging the clutch. And it's like, I probably can get it sorted in a day or 2, but I know once I sort that, there'll be something else and there'll be something else. And it now has just become so overwhelming that like, I don't even want to go work on it.
Right.
And it's like, this was this car that I've had for 20 years that I've owned longer than any other car I have, was really special to me and kind of a weird part of like my identity of like, oh, Brian likes weird 5-cylinder Audis. and then it like, I allowed the YouTube, and like the crazy thing is in all of this, we never even put out any of the content from YouTube because we got to this point where the car was sort of promised to SEMA that we were having to build so fast because it was like in the Toyo booth. Like we couldn't even keep up making the content. So, and then we just never finished it. And then, you know, a bunch of things changed and it was like, the car just sat, and it's like, and now the car's sitting at my friend's shop and it's like, it's on my list, but it's like, even when it's done, it's such a crazy car now. I can't just like go drive it around town. Now it's like, okay, cool. It's done. I put it on a trailer, bring it to the track.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know if I really wanted that car. Yeah. And like, why did I go that far? And it's like, because everyone was like building race cars and everyone was building these crazy cars. And it's an interesting model because at the same time, like, look, I'm the last one to sit here and cry and be like, oh, the internet forced me to build a crazy car.
Yeah, right.
It's
like the process is still fun, even if like,
but like I this thing happened where like I spend more time in my 1975 Swallowtail Rabbit that's like pretty much stock. And I enjoy driving in on it and I enjoy tinkering it. And like the things I dream about building nowadays are like less ridiculous and it's less about the numbers. Like I want to build something that's useful. Like right now, one of the projects that like I think about all the time, I have a 1986 Quantum Synchro wagon. I'm sure you know what that is.
Yep.
A lot of people don't. It's basically if Audi built a 4000 wagon,
right.
Volkswagen got the naming on it. This is a car I wanted when I was younger because I was a snowboarder and I was living up in Burlington, Vermont when I went to University of Vermont, and I wanted something that was all-wheel drive, and I was such a Volkswagen like just devotee that like I had to be like it has to be a Volkswagen.
Yeah.
So it was like the only all-wheel drive Volkswagen at the time, and I'm like, okay, this is the car I'm gonna buy. And then it is like not in great condition, and I've been running through the engine options in my head like every day. I'm like, is it a VR6 24 valve? Do I do it? Should I run a TDI? I don't really like how TDIs sound, but like maybe is it that, you know, like, oh, maybe it should be this, maybe it's just, you know, maybe, and like I just keep going through this whole list. The other day I think I decided it's a 16 valve turbo. I'll probably change my mind in a week from now. And the whole concept for this car for me is I really, really like solo road trips, right? I like going on a road trip, and I wanted a car that was long enough that I could fold down the passenger seat and sleep inside. So it's stealthy, right? I don't have to have like a rooftop tent. Yep. Like I wanted a car that was rough enough on the outside that like parked somewhere, like you might not really notice it. Mm-hmm. Like maybe it's got some OZ wheels on it or something. So if you know, but if not, it just kind of blends in.
Yeah.
But it's fun to drive because I got into the like overland side. I mean, I was a Land Rover guy before, like when we still called it expedition cars, not overlanding, but whatever. Like I was always into that. But then it like got to the point where like you live in like the United States, it's like you spend 90% of your time on tarmac to get to a dirt road.
If not more.
And it's like that entire experience in my disco is brutal.
Oh yeah.
It tops out at like 70 miles an hour, and if a good wind comes, I'm changing lanes.
Well,
right?
and even if you're not in something old like that, like even if you're in a 2017 Tacoma, you have 35 or 37 inch tires and a roof tent, and the thing is just like gutless on the highway and like blows around.
Yeah.
Terrible.
And the amount of times I can tell you the amount of times, like almost every time I take a great trip in that truck back in the day. And by the way, for those who care about that truck, it does run now. I just need to make content about it because everyone's like, because I put a R2.8 Cummins in it.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And it does. It's running. The only thing is I had to move the shifters around, and I never finished the center console, so you can just see all the axles moving.
Nice.
So my wife's like, I'm not driving that. Like, finish that. And there's just too many cars to get in the way. But back to what I was saying, like this Quantum is this thing I think about. It's like I want it to have 400 horsepower, and I want it to be reliable. I want to be able to like stop and get parts because if it breaks, because if I'm by myself and it breaks, like, and this is now the car I want to build because it really kind of services me. And like I realized that like there's a small audience that probably wants to watch that. Like what's the thumbnail? Like Scotto's semi-reliable 380 wheel horsepower, not an Audi Volkswagen.
Yeah.
It's not as exciting, maybe, but like for me, the story of it is exciting because the thing I geek out more on is like I want to build metal bumpers for it that look like factory bumpers because I don't want it to look like it was like a safari vehicle.
Right.
I got this company, I'm blanking on their name and I wish I could remember. They're from the UK and they make like an airbag, like hybrid air. And they make this airbag attachment that goes over coilovers. So you can raise it 4 inches, but when you drop it down, it's just like the coilover setup. So like now I can have a vehicle that when like I'm running just my KWs on it, when I'm like on a great windy road, and that was the point I was saying before, is like the amount of times I've driven my disco and been like, I wish I had something fun on this road. Like this is a windy road and I want to drive this, but instead I'm like hoping I don't roll this thing over the Armco around this corner, right? Yeah. And but this was, instead I'm sitting there going like, I want to be able to like build out this thing, and like for me, like I geek out over the idea of like being able to lift it up and giving myself a little bit of like ground clearance, and it's like, and I've thought through this to such a serious extent of like, what would be a good thing to sleep in? Like, how do I like keep the moisture out? Because I basically want to build an overland vehicle that doesn't look like an overland vehicle and has none of the like accoutrement on the outside, like what we call like camp rice, like just mounting random stuff. Like, I don't want any of that. I just wanted to be able to drive on a gravel road. Like I'm not trying to like go the Rubicon Trail. I just want to be able to drive on washboard and all that and tear up route, and then also have fun on a good like windy road, but drive across country and like feel it be reliable. And like that's the kind of stuff that excites me now. And I just like, there's probably like 12 people who want to watch that. I don't know.
Well, there's enough to make it like to pay for like the parts and stuff, I bet. Like you do that, you'd make enough.
Remember
to do
what
that
you said about
stuff,
if we all sit down, we can see. This,
like maybe it is. Maybe it is.
I would like to circle back. We didn't finish the thought on if there could be another Gymkhana, but
we're go for it.
Kind of lower on time, but I think like if we get back to that and then talk about the future of what you've planned, we'll come back to this build and like what you're filming and like if you're trying to get millions of views or just do your car yourself, but maybe for sake of telling the story in order, like, so Hoonigan, the company that bought Hoonigan, went out of business, but something is
so they
still
didn't go out of
existing.
business.
They just went
They didn't go out of
bankrupt.
business.
They went bankrupt.
So it's a Chapter 11. So Chapter 7 is out of business. It's like they sell everything for parts. A Chapter 11 is basically a restructuring. So
something is still going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, the company's still operating. Like they still are. They posted something this morning about a project they did with RWB. So basically, with a Chapter 11, how that works, and I'm not an expert on this, but unfortunately, I was tied up in it, so I had to figure it all out myself. Is that they basically took all of the shareholder equity, that's like me, and they deleted it, and they gave all of that to the bank to offset the debt. And that's how that works.
So you didn't see anything?
No. It's pretty miserable.
Probably never will?
No, it's gone. That's it. Like it's literally deleted. It's not like, it's just not like the stocks are down. It's like they basically it's like a debt equity transfer. So basically, and that was, so you realize it's all the shareholders. So it's anyone who was a shareholder in the company, and realize that company is a company. and I think one of the most confusing things for people is because they rebranded as Hoonigan as the main company, people are sitting there going, how did those guys spend $1.2 billion? And it's like, we didn't.
Yeah.
The parent company
it's
did,
50 some odd brands, and they're massive brands. American Racing, right? Like, these huge brands underneath it. And then a lot of these companies were companies of founders who became shareholders in the company. Right. So there's a lot of those people who were sort of involved in that. So that's basically what went down, and obviously not happy about it. But life is life, right? And like, I really have been trying to take the positive side of this. Of like, I had a fucking great time running that brand with a bunch of fucking great friends, and with Ken, and we had some really, really good times. I built I think a decent enough resume for myself to continue to go and have fun and do things like that. It's unfortunate sort of how it all went. That being said, like, they are in a position now where like they're out of the bankruptcy, right? Or they're going to be out of the bankruptcy, because I don't want to get too into the financial side of this. And I knew none of this until I was given a bankruptcy letter.
Oh no.
So I didn't know this until I had to go research all of it. Basically, it was a pre-pack, which means that like before they went into bankruptcy, they had already come to an agreement with the banks on how they were going to get out of it. Right. So that way they went through it pretty quickly. So now like they are back and operating again with different owners. So like the owning group is gone. They've brought in a different group that's running it now. There's still, by the way, like there's still a bunch of people at Hoonigan who I love dearly because they were part of my family when it was still my company, and they stayed on, right? And like, so there's still a huge bunch of people in the editorial group. So it's like, it's hard for me because it's like, I don't want to root against them.
Right.
It's like, they're my friends, and they were there and helped build this thing with me and all the guys. Like they were a lot of the guys who were the guys behind the scene were still there. And obviously you have Gary and Mike are still there. And like, so it's an interesting thing. So right now, and like, I can't, I'm not involved anymore. Right. Like I sort of ceased to be involved on that when I left last year. I had offered to sort of stay and kind of help doing stuff. And other than trying to put together like a future Gymkhana film with them, I didn't really work on any of the other projects in the past year. So like, I can't really talk to like what their plan is, but like, I do know that my friends are still going to work every day trying to figure out what's next. Yeah. Right. And sort of where that goes. How that all pans out, like, I don't know, but they are, right now, I think they're in a point where like they got through the shitty part, shitty for me, especially, and a bunch of other people. But now they're in a part where like, okay, now they're like, what's the next stage and like, where do they rebuild from there? And like, I can't speak to that because I'm not there anymore.
Yeah.
And it's
good to hear that
bittersweet.
it's going somewhere though.
Yeah.
Because I guess from the outside looking in, I felt like the remaining posts and stuff like riding out the storm, like to the death, because I thought it was like fully out of business. So I thought like maybe they had a couple more like a year-long contract and then it was over. That was my impression. So it's good to hear that it's going to keep going. And so I guess in that piece, like, do you have any interest in, or have they asked like to be part of it, or are you just going to kind of move on to the next thing or try to take Gymkhana only, or?
It's
I'm sure that's what
we
goes
probably
through your
we
head
probably
at
don't
night.
have enough hours left to unpack all of that. It's a very it's a very difficult thing for me because one, Hoonigan will always be this thing I built, right? Mm-hmm. Like I still have like a pride for it because it was this thing that not only I built, but I built with a dear friend of mine who's not here anymore, which like makes it really a different type of sentimental element to it. But I've also realized, and not just in Wheel Pros, but also in sort of the job I went and did afterwards, is like, I'm not a good employee anymore. I spent so long being an entrepreneur that like, I just don't
run the show.
Yeah. I want to run the show. So it's like, I just don't know if like the way I operate today works that well inside of like a big business anymore,? So it's one of those things where it's like, I just don't know if that's like a fit for me. I will say though that like, it all depends on where it goes. And like, I would never be like, oh, I'm never going to do another one of these again. I'll never do that. It's like, if if Leah Block was like, I really want you to direct the film with me and I'm going to do it, you know, Gymkhana film, it's like, I'm not going to say no to Leah, right? Like it's one of those situations, you know, and we'll figure out how to make it work and kind of do that stuff. So, but right now it's not like in the plan, right? Like for me right now, it's like, and I'll tell you, I'm, you know, and to get into the Hoonigan thing, because it's just like one thing that's kind of like an interesting thing to address is like, you know, through all of this, I've heard everything from like, you know, private equity destroys everything. There may be some truth to that, but private equity also owns everything. So,
and a lot of things don't happen without it. So.
Yeah.
And you can hit a ceiling, like you were saying, like you couldn't have built.
Well,
you know.
I think the one thing that like we were very good at not really showing problems from the outside, but like the pandemic was super hard for us. We employed a huge group of people and we weren't bringing the money in during that period of time. So we like any sort of buffer we had, we really kind of blew through during that time. And we had gotten to a point where like the company went on a lot longer and then especially Ken had planned. I mean, Ken's original idea was like, we build something and we license it out in 5 years. And we're done.
So like try to get some big brand to buy the whole Hoonigan name.
Yeah, well, because originally Ken had a very like DC Shoes model to it, which was like, it's a brand, it's clothing, it's branding. And that's something you can license to someone else. They do all the work and we stay in sort of a creative role.
Yeah, where we're drifting cars around San Francisco.
It's never more, it's never more than an employee base of 5 people. And that's the company. And that's how the company started. And then my idiot ass was like, we're going to start making these YouTube videos for fun. And like, we built this whole other thing that we just didn't kind of really, we knew was there. And I think that, and this is like, looking at the clock, like we don't have a ton of time left, but like I talked with you guys on this, you know, off radio where we were talking about the idea that like the model right now does not really support companies like Hoonigan to make money in that way. Right. Like meaning like, it's hard to employ 40 plus people in a company that does that, right? Like you look at other people who have a successful model who've done that, whether it's yourselves or an Adam LZ or Cletus, it's like they have like smaller teams that are operating, right?
Really small. I think smaller than people realize.
Yeah. And we had, I mean, at one point, we had like 45 or 48 employees full time. Like these are people who have 401k benefits. We were running a real business.
Yeah.
And there definitely got to a time where we were like, we don't think this is sustainable anymore. And the goal for the Wheel Pros relationship was that if we went there, all their in-house brands could become our clients.
Yeah.
And that really reduced the need to go chase money.
Right.
And we could just go and kind of build stuff. And at first, you know, in the first 6 months, it really kind of worked that way and the economy changed and things shifted and that kind of all went that way. And it's like, I'm hesitant to like, you know, look, were mistakes and bad decisions made? Like they are, but they are at all companies. Like I'm hesitant to like throw blame that direction only because like we rolled the dice thinking that it would be a good move out. And we didn't want to do was start laying off all of our employees and shrinking the size of the company.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So it was like, this wasn't a like, I think everyone's like, oh, this was a get rich. They sold out and this is what they did. It was like, we had a good run. This is where we are. And we grew to a size that it's really hard to shrink down from now.
Right.
So,
and if you're not growing, you're dying. And especially in a business like this, like 100%. If you're not doing more content, bigger builds, like you are dying.
It was also exhausting.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about this last week, but like there was a period of time, and I apologize to every other creator that we set this standard, but like there was a time where like we were doing 14 pieces of content a week on YouTube across 5 channels. Yeah. Like that was not sustainable, but we knew it was a way for us to not just get ahead, but just start really pushing ahead. And also a way to, how do you build 15 different personalities?
And no one ever talked about second place. It's like, oh, automotive YouTube is like Hoonigan, like the whole top of the pyramid. And then like, well, you guys were doing so much.
I mean,
stuff.
I would say Donut was living in a different sphere than us because we were doing, they were doing sort of the explainer stuff when they were at this period, and we were doing the like lifestyle fun stuff, and we were sort of orbiting in these different worlds.
But if you were counting all the views from all the channels, you were still like super dominant in this space.
Yeah, especially when you put in the Jimkhana films and all that. Those things were a massive beast. But like, it was, and it was super fun, but we definitely built something that was like, it was going to run hard. Like, what's the like expression? Like, we're here for a good time, not a long time. Like, it was that. Like, we were going to run hard, run fast, and we were going to need an engine rebuild at the end of the run. And like, and I think we all knew that, and we all got, we got to a point where none of us had expected to become, I hate to use the word famous, but internet famous. Like, that wasn't the goal for any of us. Like, we were just working at a company in the background. I was the guy behind the guy for KEN Block.
Yeah, it seemed like your role was like in the story and how it's portrayed and how it looks, and like a director role.
And that's what I love. Yeah. I love that part the most. I like talking, which is why I enjoy doing podcasts.
You don't say.
I love the sound of my own voice. That's why the headphones are great, because like I barely even hear you guys. I'm just.
I'm just so excited for you too. I mean, maybe this is a good transition point since we have 15 more minutes.
Well, let me wrap out that point, because I think. So I think for us it was like we were. It's very easy to look at the timeline and say, I think there's two ways to look at the timeline. One is the day Wheel Pros, acquired Hoonigan, it all went downhill. That's not true. The first 6 months after the acquiring was fucking great. Right. We had this amazing CEO who came in through the transition and really helped us kind of build stuff out. We moved into Tire Slayer Studios, which was this huge space. Mm-hmm. There was so much going on at the time, and like we actually had money, and all of those guys who were working for less than they should have were all getting raises. So it's like it was finally this moment where people were getting like actually like properly paid. We were also bringing in help for people who were kind of drowning in all of this, and I think that was kind of a great moment. The other, I think, storyline you hear a lot is like, well, when Ken passed, it was all over, and it's like I actually think Ken's passing is kind of gave us like rejuvenated us for a moment, because like things were actually pretty bad leading up to Ken. Like, and bad internally in that, like, everyone was just a little over each other. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm just, like, we're all great friends now.
Right, but you've been spending every day
with each other, and dealing with a bunch of stuff, and, you have different egos and things like that. And everyone wanted to do their own thing. Mm-hmm. I wanted to build dumb cars. Hurt wanted to go drifting. Vinny wanted to go do track days. Like, everybody wanted to do something different. It was hard to get everyone to like agree and do stuff together anymore. So like that, I think everyone like had done their time and they wanted to go do their own things. Like, I am so excited to watch all those boys build I am the biggest cheerleader of all of them, right? Whether it's Zach, and doing his whole thing with, Chop Lord and everything. And, and obviously Vinny and Ron and Hurt and Dan and Soupy. I don't want to leave anyone's name out, but like, it's cool to go watch everyone go and do their thing independently. Right. And
it's cool.
And they wanted to, and I think everyone wanted to go just venture out,
right?
But we were also sort of like sticking together because like it's all we knew.
Right.
There was this weird like family thing where you're like, oh, I fucking kind of love you because you're like my brother, but I also fucking hate you right now, And I think Jackass went through this similar thing. Like I always compare us to Jackass, where it was like it was hard. We were also getting older.
Right.
Like Hurt and I had families, like we had children, which changes things, and like and we also were no longer really excited to all work on a $500 BMW anymore, because we all had our own projects. We all built more cars, made more money through that process. And like, it kind of changes the things that you like and you're interested in, and it changes the stuff we were doing. So I to kind of round that out real quickly, Ken passed, and there was actually this surge for the next 3 or 4 months where we were like, we are not going to let this die.
Like, this can't
and
be the end.
And we all got back together, and actually the company very much was like, you guys just need to focus on this. You need to focus on this. And we did. And I think we gave it our best try. And I everyone did, but I definitely woke up one day and I was like, I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted. This is 13 years of this. And I've been working a 12-hour day every day. Like, my kid is getting to a certain age. I just don't know if I can do this anymore. And and look, I'm not going to say, like, the thing that is this, like, I think revisionist history is like, Ken had his side of the business and Hoonigans had their side of the business, and they very rarely sort of intermixed. Like, I worked on the Ken business and I worked on the Hoonigan business, right? Ken was HRD, and like the Ken thing ceased to exist that like was a massive shift, right? Like it was just over, like that was it. But then we still had the Hoonigan side of things, and it's like we were all already sort of struggling. I think it's just a group trying to figure out what the content was that we wanted to make. And like, you know, this versus that was doing well, but it wasn't really a passion item for a lot of us. It was, you know, it was just this thing. And we were all really trying to figure out what was the next piece. What was it, where we were going from this, what we were going to go do and what was next. And I think just like I just broke in the summer. Like it just got to a point where I was like, what am I doing? You know, and you have this moment in like, I'll be 45 in whatever, a month from now. And, you had this moment where you're like, I started in this business 20 years ago and I've worked 12-hour days every day since this. And I have achieved a ton. Like I have done so much that if I quit the industry right now, like I've been so fortunate to do all of the things I've done, like shut down the Bay Bridge and even shut down streets in Dubai and build you know, this cult like group of people that like all felt a connection through the brand. And like one of the number one things I love is being at places like SEMA and having people come up to me and be like, man, like you guys really inspired me to like do my thing. Sick. Like that for me is such a takeaway. I've never been driven by money. It's like, it's not my thing. I didn't really care about that. It's one of the reasons why like the bankruptcy sucks, but whatever, move on. Like you'll spend money, you'll make more of it, right? For me, it was the experiences and it was the ability to do my own thing and have the creative control to do the things I wanted to go do and go chase dumb things, even if everyone else thought that we shouldn't go do them, right? And like that was the part that like I really enjoyed, and I saw that part sort of changing and shifting. And it wasn't the company's fault. Like the company has like a balance sheet. They got to go do certain things. And like it was just this moment to be like, this isn't the right fit for me anymore, right? And then obviously I think, you know, that sort of shift, I think everyone felt the same thing at the same time. So like, that was just sort of the shift. And like, you know, I really left being like, hey, you know, I think I would be very surprised if there isn't a second generation of Hoonigan. Like there's enough name affinity there.
Yeah. To carry it through to the next. Yeah.
What that's going to be, I have no idea. It's not my job anymore. They don't pay me for that.
Well, and like you said, with all the guys getting together after Ken's passing and being like, all right, we have to keep this going.
Yeah.
I think there are so many fans out there that have the same thing. Like they're going to keep the Hoonigan sticker on their car.
Yeah.
They're going to remember Ken. They're going to like live their life a certain way because of what he inspired them to do. Yeah. And like, I told you my little story about how he and like how I felt from DC Mountain Lab and stuff. Yeah. And it's like, there's so many other people out there that are going to carry it on. Even if Hoonigan was like fully out of business, chapter 7, I guess.
That's when that's basically when you're a parts car. When your business becomes a parts car. Yeah.
All right. But even if it was like that, like the fans would be keeping it going for.
Yeah. And look, I understand the fans that are angry as to what happened. Right. Like as a kid who grew up in punk rock, like I was always bummed when a band like sold out or did something different. And like, I get that. And I understand that.
But it's still better to celebrate the success. But for us, like if it was like a peak.
Yeah. For us, like, I don't actually think we sold out. Cause like once if we would have sold out, if like we made Gymkhana into like a reality TV show,
right?
Like selling out is changing what you're doing. I think we got to the point where we were like, okay, we just don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, when you needed more money to take care of your people.
Yeah, it was like this was over, and we were experimenting always. Like I loved this versus that when we first made it because it was like just something new and something different. And like I was the one who was always driving new. There's this famous quote, and I think it was in the Amazon film where Ken was like, I like to take a proven recipe and just keep redoing it, but Scotto just wants to always do something new. And like he said it like he was insulting me, and I was like, wait, isn't that what you're supposed to do? Is like want to strive to keep doing new stuff? But Ken had built so much success over like, this is the Toll House cookie recipe.
Yeah,
why
getting
would you
in
change
reps.
it?
Right.
Like you get it, do it, keep doing it, and just slight variations, little tweaks, you know, and man, it was super successful for that. And like, you know, I tell people all the time, like when people ask me, like, you know, are you bummed about everything that happened? I'm like, well, it's not exactly what I wanted to work out, right? Ken and I think had this dream that we would grow into this world where we really want to launch this concept of Hoonigan films, and we can get into the scripted world and make the next Fast and Furious, as you know, not called Fast and Furious, but like our version of it, right?
That would have been so
chills.
good.
Like that was very much like the dream, and hey, maybe one day I will be able to continue to do that. We'll call it, you know, but like it'll be block films or whatever. But like, I think that part was where like our dream was when we were going, but like, we got to do some amazing stuff. And like for me, I got a master class from Ken, right? Like Ken was in the background. He was that guy that I could always go and just bounce off of and be like, and the thing about Ken and I think one of the reasons why Ken respected me was like, I fought him on everything. Most people were just like, you're Ken Block, whatever you say is right. And I'm like, you really think so? And like, he appreciated that banter.
Yeah.
A lot of times he was right. And sometimes I was right, and like, but it also gave me the confidence to fight for my own stuff and do my own thing. And, and even like the media company, like Ken didn't really know if that was a way forward because he had never done it before, and I was like, I'm from this. I understand this. Let's go do this. But he trusted me to go do that. And like, man, what an opportunity that was. And he trusted the whole band of misfits that are Hoonigan. None of those people deserved anything, myself included. And we all built something. And now they've all gone on to be successful and continued. And it was because, someone like Ken sat there and was like, yeah, like, I'll let you guys try this. Like, we were always allowed to try something and fail. Mm-hmm. And like, we had the Meta Facebook, poster in the background that was cool. But back then it was like where it says like, fail harder. Right. And it was like, there was totally the vibe, like, move fast, break things. Like we totally embraced that in the early days of Hoonigan of like, if it doesn't work, it's the internet. No one saw it. Make something else. Do it again.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's something in just way beyond the scope of the internet and entertainment. Like that's something that there's less and less of.
Yeah.
As time goes on, is that freedom to fail.
Right.
And like, I think it's very important. And, it's
It's,
how do you keep that going? And like, I don't know the answers, but I think it's super important. And we definitely don't have time to get into that subject.
No, but I'll wrap out on like, the last, like what I'm doing next and kind of like my things is like, I walked away from all of this and, I right before Ken passed away, I was sort of struggling with like what I wanted to do and if I was happy anymore. Right. And like, you get to this point where you're like, did I want all of this?
Right.
Like it was the first time that I got to slow down, like the treadmill slowed down because we had brought in other people and there was other people helping out. And I got to have these moments of like, do I want this? Right. And I also have this little amazing boy who's growing up who like, I don't want to be away from. Right. And I'm like, do I, and like, and when I say away, I don't even mean traveling. I mean, like sometimes I would just be so stressed that I'd be home and just not be present because I'm just sitting and thinking about, did this upload? Did the money come through for this? Like, is this particular, person wanting to quit right now? Like, how do we deal with this? Right. Like all of that was this constant thing. And, I think I sat there looking at all of that and was like, do I really want this? And I went and I met with a friend of mine, this guy, Foster Huntington. Probably know his like he invented #vanlife.
Oh really?
I knew him from Instagram only. I was driving this Audi 4000 home from Canada that I had bought, and I like stopped by his place and like stayed in his treehouse, and we were like chatting one night, and he just said to me, he's like, I think you gotta go forward and be like, do you want to mean a lot to a little or a little to a lot? Right. And Hoonigan was like mean a lot to a little.
Right.
Right. Like, I mean, sorry, mean a little to a lot.
Yeah.
Right. Like every person who has a Hoonigan sticker on their car, but didn't really watch all the content. Right. Like there was this group of people who were ultra loyalists, but then we were also the #1 selling sticker at Zoomies for years. We were selling more stickers than people were watching us. Like there was just this audience that just liked Hoonigan as a brand. That was the meaning a little to a lot. But if I thought about like my own content, like there's this episode that I was always made fun of for where like I literally spend the entire episode like cleaning a rusty bolt. And like I'm not even cleaning it with good tools. It's 3:00 in the morning and like I don't have a wire brush. So I'm like coming up with every other way to clean this fucking thing. And like, I made a whole episode out of it. And the editors put it together because they just thought it was funny. And like, it ends up doing like whatever, 300, 400,000 views. And it became this joke of like Scotto cleans a rusty bolt, all the way to the point that we made like apparel called like Scotto's like bolt restoration. Because it was like, people are like, oh yeah. And in Zach's episode, he like drops in a big block and, and adds fuel injection. In this episode, Scotto cleans like 2 M8s. And I think, and I've said this to you guys in the past, like, Bad Obsession Motorsports, like Binky, like I love that content and I like the speed of it. I wish it'd come out a little bit more frequently, but I like that. I like that detail to stuff. And I was like, you know what, that's kind of like the content I want to make. Which means
I agree.
Which means it's never going to be 1 million views again. Probably, maybe, I don't know. Maybe it will.
I mean, sometimes it is,
but I don't think you can expect it to be.
Right. You can't. Yeah, you can't go into it expecting that to be every time. Like that can't be the goal.
Yeah, like I never wanted to be in front of camera. It wasn't my plan. It became a necessity when we started doing daily transmission because I kind of had to like speak to what the company was doing. And but now as I'm sort of doing my own thing, by the way, because we talked about this the week, I started like a Patreon on Thursday, and I was stoked. Like in like 24 hours, there was like 400 people already following just from like one post on Instagram, and they're not all paid, but like I just told people like just come. I want to go here because it's like not algorithmic, and like I enjoy like that more one-on-one conversation with a smaller group. Like in the early days of Hoonigan, I replied to almost every comment during daily transmission. I would stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning and do that. I like that community side, and when it gets too big, it's hard to do it anymore. Yeah. So it's like I want that, and then I also want to go make big films, and maybe I have to go make big films with other people because like that's not really the business like I'm trying to do. So it's like I think I'm going to build really weird quantum wagons for my own stuff and speak at nauseum on a podcast, and then hopefully work with other partners to go do fun stuff, and not just Gymkhana films, like Gymkhana style films or whatever, but also like documentaries, scripted work, like that's the kind of thing.
And have your personal builds be Patreon only, or are you gonna do like it on YouTube at the same time?
No, I think the model is like put your best stuff on YouTube and deep dive on Patreon. Like the free model is what most people expect, and you still kind of keep that there and then go from there. Yeah. So, and that's like, we're blanking down 30, 29.
So I have one last question that shouldn't take too long that I've been saving. What's the best thing you've found on Marketplace in Vegas so far? Because I don't even need to ask if you do the same thing I do, where we just reset your location. Go, what can I drive home with?
I flew here so I could potentially drive home.
Precisely.
Yeah, so I could potentially drive home. It's a tough one. One of the things. Obviously, I've been looking at scouts, which we went to the scout thing, which is just weird because I don't really need a scout. So like that was one of them. There was something else because I was just telling someone, I was like, oh, I have 3 of those saved. I might have to. Oh, my phone's over there. Hold on. Let me jog the brain for a second. I'm trying to think through.
Have you seen the Chinese tank?
No,
it's not actually here, but it's listed in Vegas's,
it kind of makes sense.
It's still in China, but
they're speaking to a demographic.
It's a
here
miniature
that wants tank. Yeah,
like but it's like a ripsaw, but a Chinese miniature ripsaw.
Oh yeah,
suspension and everything. It's
awesome. I'm still on a Vanagon hunt, and there's a Vanagon here I might go look at. So because I actually want to do like a semi-high horsepower Vanagon just because of the ridiculousness of that.
Not a full camper, just the
tin top. I just kind of like how they look, and there is one here that I've got looking. There's literally something that I'm not going to remember where time's out, but that I was just talking to someone. I was like, yeah, I've got one of those saved, and they were like, that is so random. So, anyway,
well, let's do it again. We'll come to where you are or something when you start your podcast.
When I do mine, yeah. So very vehicular.
Do you know what it's? Oh, so you've.
I mean, it's like leaning in the background. Like, I think that's it. I kind of like it. It's kind of weird.
I like it.
Yeah, cool. You guys like it? Cool. You're like literally like the 3rd person I've said the name to. So if you guys are into it, we'll go from there. Yeah, I plan to launch that. I've actually been starting to do test episodes, so we'll go from there. That'll be it. So
cool.
Well, guys, thank you for letting me speak forever on this.
It's always a great time listening.
No, thank you. That's what this podcast is about, just rant sessions.
Yeah, and the one thing I really want to have happen is I want to have you guys come out to the farm. We're going to build like something kind of ridiculous on the farm to go rip around. Like
cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
sounds like a game plan.
I don't have enough property, so it needs to be small wheelbase so we can like get up the roads. So, but there's a hill climb on the property that needs a vehicle built to make it into a hill climb.
We specialize in small wheelbase machines.
I know. That's why I'm here. Yeah. So,
all right. Well, thanks.
Thanks,
that
guys.
was awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
I hope you guys enjoyed this very special episode of the Sent and Bent podcast. Brian Scotto's YouTube channel is in the description. Definitely get it a sub. Expect some big things coming out there soon. And we are giving away a 2024 TRD Off-Road Tacoma. Every $5 you spend at grindhardplumbingco.com gets you an entry to win. I can't wait to give you guys one of these trucks. And stay tuned the next couple weeks because we have 2 more big episodes coming. Interviews from people we met at the SEMA show. You guys are going to love it.